Hello everyone, welcome back into Last Protagonist, reacting to a bunch of lore videos. I hope you're doing well as always. So on last night's stream, I actually didn't react to any videos. Instead, I gave a huge presentation with the Miro board on an analysis of the shadow of the Erd Tree, the shadow tree itself. And that was kind of frantic because there was so much to cover, but I managed to get it in pretty much within the 3-hour time frame, which I was pleasantly surprised by. And today we'll actually be going back to reacting to videos again. And so the ones that I have queued up for tonight are A Human Justicar's Death in the Realm of Shadow, Elden Ring Lore and Theory, followed up by The Alchemist's Elden Ring's Buddhism is Pure Horror, then Silent Ellipses, Between Meanings, The World Turned Upside Down, Elden Ring Lore. So even though I had floated the idea that the Erd Tree could have, or the Shadow Tree could have been inverted from the Erd Tree, I still haven't watched this video yet. So it is kind of interesting how many content creators are kind of coming to potentially similar conclusions, although Silent Ellipsis might not conclude that and you might just bring it up and go against that grain. So anyway, I wanted to keep a bit more Shadow of the Erd Tree stuff themed going on after yesterday's video. And then we have Night Rain coming out really shortly, and there's been a couple extra trailers released recently, as well as the live stream of Night Rain with competition between content creators. I didn't watch that myself. I'm at the point now with Night Rain that the less spoilers, the better. Although I did go ahead and watch the Revenant trailer, and that's pretty cool. I know they also came out with an Evanescence one earlier today, which I hate that song. So anyway, True Connoisseur, nice to see you again. And Elden Enthusiast, welcome back into the stream. Give the people here what they really want to first antagonist? Nah, that dude got defeated. Hey Stella, nice to see you again. All right. So with all that said and done, let's go ahead and dive into the first video of the night with A Human Justicar's Death in the Realm of Shadow. And then it's been a while since I've actually used this, so let me know how the sound balance is when we get in. And Squiggle, welcome into the stream. I like the name.
Welcome to a spooky Halloween bonus video.
Wait, did we watch this or did I just hear this? I don't remember. I don't know. Okay.
Halloween, everyone. Today's topic is all about one thing, and it's one of the main themes found in Elden Ring, and that's death, which right off the bat feels super spooky. But as we all—
I think we did watch this on stream. I'm pretty certain. I've already liked it. That is the biggest indicator. Okay, so we're going to be, pivoting. Whoopsies. We'll check out The Alchemist, Elden Ring's Buddhism is Pure Horror, then Silent Ellipsis is Between Meanings. So, my fault, guys. We'll figure it out in the next little bit here.
In Shadow of...
Okay. So it happens when you take a break and don't clear out the backlog of the things you watched.
The Erd Tree, we were introduced to many new cultures, but the most prominent culture was that of the Tower. Despite not being mentioned at all in the base game, we discover in the DLC that the Hornsent were the driving force behind many of Marika's actions. In their pursuit of divinity, they committed many atrocities, and in turn, we were introduced to many mysteries. The Jar Shamans, the tutelary deities, the manflies, and the lamenters, just to name a few. They all seem disconnected, but in matter of fact, they are all connected through one concept: suffering. Suffering to the Hornsent was viewed as a way to reach divinity. I believe the concept of suffering in Elden Ring is inspired partially by Buddhism.
All right, I need to deal with my dog real quick, so give me 1 minute. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to back this up like 5 seconds. He said he thinks suffering has to do with Buddhism and the Hornsent. Hey, Zionis, thanks for continuing the channel membership for 45 months. Bro, that's almost 4 years. Holy crap. Thank you. In Moog, we trust. He beat the allegations. All right, let's back it up. If I can. Oh, yeah, YouTube.
Hornsent was viewed as a way to reach divinity. I believe the concept of suffering in Elden Ring is inspired partially by Buddhism. But instead of the correct view of suffering in Buddhism and how to escape it, Elden Ring has its own twisted and dark form of Buddhism. In Buddhism, suffering is an inevitable part of existence, and understanding its nature is key to achieving enlightenment. The concept of suffering in Buddhism is often explained through the Four Noble Truths. First is the truth of suffering, which acknowledge that life as we experience it is filled with suffering. This includes physical pain, emotional pain, and a deeper sense of dissatisfaction or longing. Even when we experience happiness or pleasure, there is a sense that it is temporary and can lead to frustration or disappointment when it fades. Second is the truth of the cause of suffering, which states that suffering is caused by attachment, craving, and ignorance. These desires lead to a cycle of craving for things that are impermanent. Third is the truth of the end of suffering, which states that it is possible to end suffering by letting go of attachment, overcoming ignorance, and transcending craving. One can attain a state of peace and liberation, known as nirvana.
And these themes aren't quite as prevalent in Elden Ring as they are in the Dark Souls trilogy. And 2 and 3 especially get at those themes a lot more strongly, with the way that the dark keeps on preying on people and the children of the abyss being attached to certain dark emotions like wanting and yearning with Nadalia. So, wait, Nadalia? Natasha? Why am I blanking on her name right now? Anyway, the queen, Vendrick's queen, is associated with want, and same with Vendrick as well, because he's married to her, essentially. So the throne of want, it's just kind of a big theme. And by letting go of those dark emotions and following the so-called path of the dragon, they can kind of attain their equivalent of nirvana and break through the cycle in those games. Nashandra, thank you, Zionis. I knew it was like an exotic name, and Nadalia is one of the other ones. Yeah, I was just blanking there. Thank you, sir. Eldon said it was definitely in Sekiro, right? I think so. I mean, certainly we had the Senpo monks, and they were Buddhist as you could be, pretty much. But trying to remember if there's anything quite like that. I know you have the immortality of the bug and just the dragon immortality, but those seem a little bit more divorced from the concept in Buddhism up until, Kuro wants to kind of let go of his immortality and not have other people have it because it gets weaponized, which I think is fair as well. And yeah, maybe that's just more of a meta critique on that idea.
In Nirvana, there is the ending of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and the end of suffering. The final truth is the truth of the path to the end of suffering. The way to end suffering is through the Noble Eightfold Path. This is a practical guide to ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom. In his journey, the Buddha acknowledged suffering and discovered the path to end it in order to reach enlightenment. But in the typical manner of Miyazaki, he took the principles of the Buddha and twisted them, which resulted in a dark and twisted form of Buddhism that we see most prominently in the Hornsent culture. By looking into the Hornsent through the twisted concept of suffering, we can solve many of their mysteries, starting with the most obvious one, the tutelary deities. All over the land of shadow, we can find tutelary deities. At first, you may think that they are statues, but in matter of fact, those are real Hornsent that achieved divinity. But what made them end up like this? Let's look at this image of the Buddha while he was practicing with extreme fasting. We can clearly see here that it was the inspiration behind the tutelary deities. In matter of fact, the Buddha did practice this extreme type of fasting before achieving enlightenment. But soon after, he abandoned it as he discovered that it wasn't the true path to enlightenment. He realized that extreme starvation wasn't the way to end suffering. Rather, it introduced more suffering on the human being. Instead, he taught the middle way, which encouraged balance and moderation rather than starving yourself. In Elden Ring, though, this concept was twisted. The tutelary deities actually starved themselves to death. That's why we see them now in such state. This isn't a twist though. The twist is that they did indeed reach divinity through starving themselves to death.
I think that's a little bit of a mischaracterization, and of course, this will be a difference of opinion, but the way that I look at Sokushin Butsu, which are those who have essentially mummified themselves through meditation, while one might be able to argue that they effectively starved to death, I think that's kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. And it's not as though they reached divinity through starving themselves as much as it was controlling themselves and not relinquishing their autonomy to bodily desires to an extent. So they were able to control themselves to such an extent that even the greatest motivator of all, hunger, yearning, want, craving, whatever you want to call it, couldn't overcome their self-discipline. And ironically enough, that level of control is kind of about relinquishing the control of oneself and letting go of the ego. And kind of that form of ego death is essentially a way to transcend the constructs of an individual to become something greater, essentially. Not like greater, that's kind of a poor way to phrase it, but to escape the cycle, I guess. To just let go of individuality and return to infinity, because to borrow a page from Dark Souls 3's book, the world began without knowledge, and without knowledge it shall end, or something like that. And I think that kind of principle is at play with this as well. And that's also why I think the tutelary deities have revered spirit ashes, which don't have any personalities to them, whereas all other forms of personalities are remnants in the other cremains. And yeah, I talked about that on last night's stream. Hey, Hilko, welcome back in. And Joe Lore, welcome into the stream. You just felt those guys in the Hornsent were a bit more patterned after what came before Buddhism? Could you elaborate on that? And then Joel says, it's tricky to talk about divinity in Elden Ring compared to Buddhas because Buddhas aren't the same thing as Devas. True. Yeah. So, of course, these are parallels, and he might go into more details here, but this is just kind of a little bit of a difference of opinion that I have. And Halo of the Sun, nice to see you again. It's still death with extra steps, very Hornsent coded. If anything, it's death with less steps. The few steps possible, perhaps.
Evident by their heads growing enormous horns and accumulation of revered spirit ash in their palms. So in Elden Ring, suffering was actually a way to reach divinity. But instead of acknowledging suffering and trying to escape it, the Hornsent adorned suffering up till their demise. And then their suffering would end and they will reach divinity. Seeing how the tutelary deities reached divinity, many other Hornsent tried to imitate them. Some succeeded, but others failed. Those who failed to become tutelary deities became what is known as the Curse Blades. The spirit ash of Cursed Blade Mira states that, long ago, before the land was overshadowed by invasion, this scourge was shunned, and the Cursed Blades were imprisoned. We can see here the fate of those who fails to reach divinity. They get shunned and treated as abominations. Judging from their appearance, we can deduce what happened to the Cursed Blades. Just like their tutelary deities, they practiced extreme starvation, but unlike their ancestors, they failed to starve themselves to death. They did quit before their demise, and in turn they were punished, as they only suffered without succeeding to end their suffering through death. So the Hornsent didn't encourage suffering for the sake of suffering. Suffering to them was a mean to an end. Suffering was a path to divinity, but only when their suffering ends they reach the divine. Through this lens, we can understand more of the Hornsent mysteries, the man-flies, and the lamenters. But before that, I want to tell you about today's video sponsor, Quantum Marmalade.
That's a hell of a segue. Anyway, before getting into today's video sponsor, I wanted to welcome back in Prince Lorian. Nice to have you again. And I wanted to mention, what was he just talking about? Oh, yeah. The Hornsent tutelary deities. They're very enigmatic to me because it seems to me as though of the Hornsent that we see, which is very few in number, barely any really seem concerned with tutelary deityship, in which I mean we don't really see so many practicing ascetic Hornsent, although they could have been cleansed for all we know. And of the ones that we have left, we have the Hornsent Grandam, who wants to enact vengeance against Marika and her progeny and Mesmer and all them. And so if she was a really good Hornsent, maybe one should make the argument that she should have left all that stuff alone and turned the other cheek, I guess, but perhaps not. And then, of course, the sculpted keepers and the lion dancer folks throughout the tower, they're doing their own thing, channeling the rage of the divine beasts. So that seems a little bit at odds with the meditative posing tutelary deities that we see throughout the lands of shadow. So yeah, I don't know if there is a change in the philosophies of the Hornsent, if they thought they could circumvent some of the drawbacks of the way that they suffered by using trees and tree people and shamans or jar scent, whatever you want to call them. So yeah, it's a little bit strange. Hey Chadwick, nice to see you again. More content you cannot discuss and don't understand. Well, it's going to get even worse tomorrow with Night Rain, essentially. So best of luck, buddy. It could be that the meditators we see that look like the ones in Demon Souls might be doing tutelary deity practices. Oh yeah, so those dudes, I'm not so worried about them, but they do lack horns, suspiciously enough. But yeah, the little monumental boys. All right, anyway.
Today's video is sponsored by Quantum Marmalade, an indie sci-fi comic that delves into dark science, twisted biochemistry, and thrilling explosions. The comic was written by Danny Walker, a fellow Elden Ring lore enthusiast who is inspired by games like Warframe, Destiny, Borderlands, and of course Elden Ring. The story follows a mad scientist who creates toxic bioweapons by fusing people with a mysterious alien tree. It's up to a team of cyborg warriors to stop him. I have read the comic and can personally attest to the amazing story and art. I highly recommend supporting Danny's current Kickstarter for Chapter 5 and 6, link in the description, or head over to quantummarmalade.com for more details. Going
Hey Rocky, nice to see you again. Welcome back in.
back to the twisted FromSoft take on Buddhism, we can explain the man-flies and the lamenters. One of the most grotesque creatures we can find in the lands of shadow are the man-flies. But the horror runs even deeper, as those aren't actually creatures. The man-flies were once Hornsent, and not even any Hornsent. They were the upper echelons of the Hornsent society. Every man-fly in Elden Ring can drop the silver horn tender item, which reads as follows: old currency used by Hornsent, made by coating spiral horns with silver. These trinkets were once symbolic of society's upper echelons. The silver horn tender can be found in many places around the Shadowlands. but the only enemies that can drop them are the man-flies. FromSoft seems to be trying to tell a story here, a horrible story. Let's first start by explaining the man-fly's sickness. The man-fly's ashes states the following. Afflicted Hornsent eventually metamorphosed into a fly-like form. It was believed that the moment the transformation took place, they were relieved from their suffering. As we can see here, the theme of suffering to reach something more divine continues. Just like the tutelary deities who suffered horrible fatal starvation, the man-flies too suffered through the metamorphosis. And just like the tutelary deities, they reached something greater in the eyes of the Hornsent. The Hornsent who venerated the crucible and its beastly traits probably viewed the man-flies as something divine. But the truth is even more horrible. The man-fly's sickness wasn't a normal plague. Rather, it was man-made, and the Hornsent upper echelons participated in this horrible experiment willingly. The alien
So, I don't believe the text says it quite the way that he does, so I guess we'll see what he says here, and then I'll talk about it more.
talisman states the following. When the weak were infected with the dreaded fly sickness, they perished well before the metamorphosis could take hold. Oddly, those who cared for the infected and made certain they were given a proper burial were never afflicted themselves. Again, we can see here the theme of failing to endure the suffering and in turn failing to reach divinity. Only those strong enough to endure the suffering until the metamorphoses were relieved. The others, they only suffered until their demise. Now what about those who cared for the infected? Why weren't they infected themselves? We can actually see with our own eyes those who supposedly took care of the infected. All over the places we can find man-flies in, we can find those witch doctors-like characters. Oddly enough, they all use the swarm of flies incantation, which is puzzling. Or is it? In matter of fact, it's not odd at all, because those witch doctors are the cause of the plague, and they used the power of the Mother of Wounds to do it.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. I don't like the way that he's framing it as a matter of fact when there's nothing textual to truly back that up. Now, if you wanted to say that that's his inference, I think that's perfectly fine. But for a lot of people who aren't familiar with every item description in the base game and in the DLC, this can really lead people astray and just kind of take him at face value, which is why I tend to be pretty stringent about pointing this kind of thing out when I see it happen. And of course, sometimes stuff like this happens regardless of our best efforts, and we're all human, so I also want to take that into account. But I do have disagreements about the interpretation of this series of events between the flymen or man-flies and their handlers, so to speak. But I could reserve those comments till we hear a little bit more. So, Gigantosaurus, nice to see you again. Is this supposed to be related to rot or the blood plague? Most likely things relating to the Mother of Truth and blood flies specifically. Is Midra an example of a Hornsent failing to endure suffering, the no more and all that? Well, he endured suffering up until he chose not to, and then he stopped. But his suffering was Three Fingers afflicted, and it's a little bit separate from the Hornsent suffering, I guess. So that's a good question to ask in relation to the rest of the points brought up by the alchemist here. Sionis, you thought it was a weird form of bloodletting, like using the blood flies instead of leeches. Maybe. I think there's more to it, and I'll talk about that a bit more, and we'll see. Hold on.
Why they were never affected themselves. It was all a part of their experiment to reach divinity. What's more terrifying is that the upper echelons of the Hornsent participated willingly. As I already said, all the man-flies were of the upper echelons, evident by them dropping the silver horn tender item. We can paint a picture here. The upper echelons of the Hornsent wanted to buy their way to divinity. Therefore, they went to those witch doctors for a solution. and they did provide one. They would inflict them with the man-fly's sickness, and if they were strong enough, they would turn into something divine. A beast with the vestiges of the primordial crucible, or so did they think. The witch doctors turned them into grotesque abominations, but to their defense, they did provide what they promised. The man...
Did I turn off the captions? No, I guess they just stopped. Yeah, so saying that they're turning them into the beasts of the divine crucible, maybe that's what they believed, but I should probably re-listen to this section. But if he's saying these beasts of the divine crucible are being created through this practice, then it would imply that the mother of truth is related to the crucible, which might be what the alchemist believes, but that might be something that not everybody is on board with. And I think those kind of implications are important to track when looking at these kind of ideas outside of a vacuum.
Flies gained vestiges of the primordial crucible, and when they transformed, they were relieved from suffering. They did reach the twisted form of nirvana that Miyazaki made. We can even find man-flies preying in beasts all over Inner Elim, but at what cost? Deep inside one of the jails of the Hornsent, we can find an incredibly unique enemy, the Lamenter. A character that the Hornsent feared so deeply that they built the entire jail and hid him away in it. Taking a deep look at the Lamenter, we can partially know why, but the truth goes even deeper. First, the Lamenter possesses huge horns, a big sign of divinity for the Hornsent. But looking again, we find some red hair growing on his body and an incomplete face on his back. A familiar sight that we already saw in the lands between. The Lamenter possessed some traits of the fire giants and their fell god. We can understand now why the Hornsent feared the Lamenter so greatly. He reminded them of the fire giants and their fell god, a race that they feared so deeply. We are told that the fell god haunts the sagas of the Hornsent, but there is more. The Lamenter's mask states that the transformation tallies with a state of a denizen of paradise, but the people of the tower denied and hid it from the world. In their foolishness, they viewed true bliss with deep fear. Despite the Lamenter being in eternal suffering, we are also told that they have a sense of contentment. But why? Why are the Lamenter, despite being in extreme suffering, is referred to as a denizen of paradise? Again, this is a twisted form of Buddhism. As we said, the act of escaping the cycle of suffering is called nirvana. It's actually paradise in Buddhism. That's why the Lamenter is referred to as a denizen of paradise, and this state is said to be a bliss. The Lamenter achieved nirvana, but not through acknowledging suffering and escaping it. The Lamenter lived in suffering. Suffering was his nirvana. He realized that suffering is inevitable, and if so, then why try to fight it? If suffering is inevitable, then perhaps we should embrace it. In a way, the Lamenter escaped suffering through adorning it. If you are in extreme suffering, then you can't suffer any further, right? That concept terrified...
He's already suffering, sir. He can't suffer over any further. Just reminds me of Super Troopers. So, right. I do want to go back to the bit about the manflies, but not sure if he's going to touch back on it now. So maybe I should just stop here for a second. Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult to talk about this without a bunch of context, but my take on the manfly witch doctors, as our friend the alchemist was calling them, is that to me they are the equivalent of the perfumers who would try to heal those on the battlefield or those deemed impure, and or the war surgeons, which Vare was a part of. And part of the reason why I say that is because there is a blade of mercy that they use, which is very similar to what you get with the dagger talisman, I think. I should probably pull up the descriptions. So, And for anybody wondering about this, I do discuss it a little bit in my video on what I call the jar scent. So hopefully it's a little bit more coherent there than what I'll be doing from memory. Of Mercy. Blade of Mercy. Okay, just like Bloodborne. Oh yeah, I should probably make this gigantic. So, the Blade of Mercy is a thin, blood-stained dagger no longer fit for use. Hornsent employed this to honorably end the suffering of a compatriot. After claiming numerous lives, the dagger is now broken but has acquired a spectral aura. So, the Hornsent are ending the suffering of those around them, and these could have been like battle folk. Maybe they were also used on those who had failed to become manflies. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the idea is similar. What's it called? Okay, Medicine is Mercy. It's similar to the Misericord, which I think is depicted on the dagger talisman. Dagger favored by military physicians in white. The pointed blade is hard and sharp, making critical hits especially potent. Medicine is Mercy, and mercy upon the battlefield is ruthless. Beware the killers clothed as men of compassion. Now, dagger talisman. The white-garbed field surgeons come to the aid of friend and foe alike by dealing a final deadly thrust to spare them from the prolonged agony of a mortal wound. A sense of mercy is a catalyst for bloodlust. So if we do have the catalyst of bloodlust, we do kind of have the Mother of Truth connection potentially being present in the Shadowlands as well, beyond just whatever is going on with Moog or the Blood Fiends, whom I believe are also Hornsent. So anyway, to say that the witch doctors were deliberately infecting all of the Hornsent does seem a little bit, I don't want to say like wrong. It just doesn't resonate super well with me personally. So I don't know how you guys feel though. True, you don't know that the jail was built for the Lamenter. That seems like a claim without strong evidence unless you're forgetting something. I think it's called Lamenter's Jail or Lamenter's Prison, something like that. But I know what you mean though, because the jail could have gotten that name after the fact. Suffering is leveling a little bit. Giganto, you're curious if Moog ever traveled to the Land of Shadow and it has a connection with the Manflies and Blood Fiends. So I do think that there should be a connection between the Mother of Truth and them. I don't know if there's a direct connection to Moog or anything like that. It is a little bit interesting that if there was supposed to be a greater Moog connection, we don't really have any luminary type folk who espouse Moog and the Mother of Truth's truth. So perhaps not. Good question though. All right. So I don't remember if I explained it as well as I would have liked, but hopefully that just kind of helps give some of my perspective on this topic.
The horns.
I'm going to back it up a little bit just so that we're not lost in the sauce.
And if so, then why try to fight it? If suffering is inevitable, then perhaps we should embrace it. In a way, the Lamenter escaped suffering through adorning it. If you are in extreme suffering, then you can't suffer any further, right? That concept terrified the Hornsent and made them imprison the Lamenter despite showing clear signs of divinity.
Yeah, pretty much if you accept your suffering, you could say that's your mea culpa in a way, like your fault, your guilt. You accept it, you take it for yourself, and then you can kind of transcend it in a way, and you can obtain happiness perhaps through that kind of realization. But to those who aren't willing to accept that, it might seem like the ravings of a madman to accept suffering as a truth in the world. So maybe there is a little bit of the duality between how the Lamenters are truly called people of paradise, even in the Japanese. Like it seems like a weird description in English, but that's because it's pretty damn strange in Japanese as well. And then Jacob Benjamin, welcome back. Or welcome into the stream, and then Logos Acolyte, welcome back. And Catini, nice to see you again. There's the Blood Fiend and the Blood Fiend Cave where they all gather that seems to be preaching to the others. Its weapons, Ash of War, acts the same as Moog's spear too. Yes, I don't disagree with that, but I think that both Moog and the Blood Fiends are communing with the Mother of Truth in a similar way. I don't know if we could say that the way that the Blood Fiends are doing it is because of something directly connected to Moog, other than maybe that's just a common way to conduct communion.
Horns, the red hair, and the face growing on his back. We are actually told that the mother of all crucibles first appeared on giants, linking them deeply with the crucible. And that's what happened with the lamenter. But that concept destroys the entirety of the Hornsent belief system. As we said, suffering to the Hornsent was a mean to an end, not the end goal like the lamenter. Now let's look at Midra and the Frenzied Flame from that concept. The Frenzied Flame is one of the most terrifying concepts in Elden Ring, a power capable of destroying everything, even spirits. This terrified the Hornsent. The Frenzied Flame philosophy is simple. Just like Buddhism, it acknowledges that suffering is inevitable. Hayata states the following when we touch her with the Frenzied Flame.
I have touched them. The words of the three fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted.
Not to toot my own horn, but this kind of makes me want to rewatch my own April Fool's video on the Frenzied Flame. I actually had a lot of fun making that one, and I really like how it turned out. Elden Enthusiast, do I have my lore bingo card? I forgot, but I can certainly pull it up. So, great comment. Let's start filling that out, huh? All right, got our whole handy dandy MS Paint version prepared. All right, so, okay, you remembered very well that we had Hayata on here, I guess. Where is my brush type? Let's do the spray paint. That's too small. All right, yeah, I guess Paint 3D is better, but it's really annoying trying to get it. I really hate what Windows has done with Paint 3D by like discontinuing it and whatnot. Oh no, I accidentally saved it with Kagare. Already done. Okay, so anyway, let's do this. All right, so Hayata's on there. Good enough. So what else did we have? Helfin, Muriel? Nope, Crucible has definitely been mentioned. I didn't get this. I need to go back to a different version or something. Whatever. Archaeology, eyes? Have we gotten eyes? No. Gek, not yet. Norse inspiration. Color theory? Not yet. America, I don't think so. Outer gods have been mentioned. Previous games? No, that was me. One body theory? No. Not Japanese yet. Demigod parentage? Norse shock? Not entirely. World tree? Not entirely. And content? Not yet. Okay. So let me try to figure out this thing. Don't judge. You know, that could have turned out worse. Good enough. Okay. Hey, Meow Laser, nice to see you again. Stella, you forgot about the bingo? Apparently so did I. Maybe First Antagonist could be a good alternative channel for fake lore videos. Just make 2 channels, one where that's just way too much work. It's already tough enough for me to come up with like actual bona fide videos and go through the effort of making them and polishing them up and voice recording everything. April Fool's video? Maybe. Yeah, just rename the channel First Antagonist for the day. Alright, anyway, let's go back in.
Put it all away with the yellow chaos flame until all is one again.
We can see here the philosophy of the frenzied flame. If suffering is inevitable, then life is a mistake. Therefore, the solution is simple. Melt it all away with the yellow flame of chaos. In that way, we can end suffering once and for all. Again, a twisted form of Buddhism. Instead of trying to escape suffering through the teachings of the Buddha, the frenzied flame wants to melt everything away. Then there is no more suffering. What's really interesting here is the relation between the frenzied flame and suffering. Despite claiming that the flame is a way to end suffering, it actually feeds off suffering. We are constantly told that those infected with the flame is in constant suffering and agony. They are so keen on finding their Lord of Frenzied Flame because they can't endure the suffering anymore. The Frenzied Flame seems directly proportional to suffering. Suffering is how you summon it. That's what happened when the merchants got imprisoned under the royal capital. And the Frenzied Flame also grows stronger when you suffer more. And this brings us to Midra. Midra, the great sage of his time, acknowledged suffering and was trying to harness its power. He looked at
Ooh, yeah, I don't know about that, but I was going to say that I do think the alchemist is kind of on point with tying suffering to the 3 fingers, and we need really look no further than the Tower of Sauron in Liurnia, because if you kill all of the little dudes at the top of the tower who are clutching their faces and are like miserable and whatnot, then the Eye of Sauron goes away. And we're also told that the Flame of Frenzy may have been conjured into being or tapped into by the despairing nomadic merchants in the bottom of Leyndell. So there's certainly a strong connective tissue of suffering leading to the Flame of Frenzy and whatnot. And Iris, wow. I actually don't know how to pronounce the first part of your name, but welcome back into the stream. And Forgeborge, nice to see you again as well.
the Frenzied Flame for answers. He studied and practiced it, but nobody could control the flame. The Frenzied Burst incantation states the following: in times past, every single person who attempted to control the flame of frenzy succumbed to madness after a desperate internal struggle. This incantation is a testament to a meager victory. After summoning the flame of frenzy and being unable to control it, Nanaya told Midra to endure. Nanaya wanted to make a Lord of Frenzied Flame out of him. By telling him to endure the suffering, she made the Frenzied Flame stronger every single day.
That is certainly one interpretation of it, or she could have also been telling him to endure, so that way he didn't unleash the Frenzied Flame and rain down calamity on everybody around him, but I don't know.
Till one day, he couldn't endure anymore. Midra endured the suffering for a very long time, but finally he broke down. In a moment of deep weakness, he succumbed to the flame of chaos and its philosophy. No more suffering, no more enduring. He would simply melt it all away. If everything is melted, then there would be no more suffering. Now let's talk about a non-Hornsent character, a controversial character, Miquella the Kind. In this video, I want to take a look at Miquella from the perspective of the twisted Buddhism that Miyazaki made.
So Rhinus asks, just because we kicked Midra's ass? No. So if you recall, when we walk into Midra's room, he says, "The depths of your foolishness," and then he kind of loses his poop, and then we kick his ass, and then he's like, "Well, screw it. If nobody can appreciate what I'm doing, then yeah, I'm gonna go." So maybe, but not entirely. It's mostly because we dumb. He can't handle how dumb we are.
We already mentioned the Buddha several times, but now let's talk about his life story. The Buddha was born almost 600 years before Christ in present-day Nepal. He was born into a royal family, and his father was a king. His father wanted him to become a great king and ruler. To ensure this, his father sheltered him from the outside world, keeping him within the palace and away from anything that might disturb his sense of luxury and comfort. As a young man, the Buddha grew curious about life beyond the palace walls. At the age of 29, he ventured outside the palace for the first time and encountered four sights that deeply affected him. An old man. He saw the effects of aging and realized that everyone grows old. A sick man. He encountered someone suffering from illness, which made him understand that sickness is part of life. A dead body. He saw death, which made him understand the inevitability of death and the impermanence of life. A wandering monk.
Can you imagine how messed up that child would be if they literally had never encountered a proper old person or anybody who was sick? I can only imagine just how much of a system shock that had to be to discover that as an adult and not really have the time to process that as a child. So it's no wonder to me that the Buddha would go on to have a kind of existential crisis that's led to his enlightenment and whatnot. And then Robbie, nice to see you again. You got Doom Eternal earlier? Nice. It's on sale. Yeah, I saw there was a pretty big sale on all of the Doom games, probably because of the release of the new one, Dark Ages. No, Logos. The Abyssal Woods does not have any connection to the Abyssal Snake. They use different terminology. So in Japanese, they call them like Naraku, which is a kind of Japanese conception of hell, but not entirely. It's, to say it like a super American style, you might have heard of Naraku from Inuyasha or something like that. Naraku is also talked about in the Shin Megami Tensei / Persona games. So it's very different from the Shinyen of the Abyss with the Abyssal Serpent. Stella said, "How do you avoid someone being sick in whatever year BCE anyway?" That's a good question. So there is probably a bit of, embellishment to the Buddhist story. Maybe not, though. I think the 29-year claim is pretty crazy because unless the Buddhist parents had them when they were really young, some effects of aging probably should have become evident to a degree. Or even like the Buddha growing up as a child, he probably should have had some conception of what it's like to grow up to some degree, one would hope, but who knows? Could just all be, proselytizing on the part of Buddhism, which might not be completely grounded in reality, but I don't know. Halo, you check off Inuyasha and Shin Megami Tensei from your bingo card? Dang, got me read real good.
Finally, he saw a man who had renounced pleasures in search of spiritual enlightenment, which inspired him to seek answers to the questions of suffering and nature of existence. These sights profoundly shook the Buddha, and he realized that money and pleasure would not provide the answers to the suffering he had witnessed. This led him to make a significant decision. The Buddha decided to leave his family, his money, and his life as a prince to seek enlightenment. This is known as the Great Departure. He took off his royal clothes, shaved his head, and set out on a journey of self-discovery. He studied under various spiritual teachers, practiced extreme asceticism, and sought answers to the question of why suffering exists and how to overcome it. Does all of this sounds familiar to you? Because to me, this seems to be a big inspiration behind Miquella's journey in the lands between. Just like the Buddha, Miquella was a prince, an Iberian destined to take the place of his mother. He also had a very strong relationship with Radagon. He was Daddy's favorite in a way. We know.
So Rocky's also making some really good comments that the alchemist is glazing over the fact that the Buddha was kept away from things that could pollute a soul and keep him from reaching the moksha aspect of life. So by sheltering the child, they're also trying to keep evil away from the child, which kind of goes hand in hand there. Although maybe evil isn't the best word, but, you know, just to try to give some kind of a conceptual tie-ins for those who are less familiar with Buddhism. And then Rocky was also saying that even the Buddha's tutors would have been kept on the opposite sides of screens from him to keep those from a lower caste from interacting with him. I actually didn't know that much about the background story of the Buddha, so thanks for sharing that. So one other comment that I have in relation to the whole Buddha parable is that in ancient times, somebody who's royalty, if they are doing a bit of a secular speed through of trying to reach divinity, that's probably like the closest that most people could get to divinity would be royalty. And then royalty could be a bridge gap between like true divinity and the people. And so if you have divinely ordained rulers who are related to the gods come down to the people to rule over them, and then amongst those you have a member of the royalty who goes so far as to abandon his royalty and therefore his divinity to kind of live life amongst the populace. In some ways that can potentially be equivocated to how Jesus is both man and divine, and that's kind of one parallel way we could potentially conceptualize the scenario, perhaps. And then Titanborn, nice to see you again. How you doing? When looking at Frenzied and how to overcome it, we'd have to look at Vike and the Ancient Dragons. With the Ancient Dragons, we could look at Placidus Hax's pose as a meditation pose. That's kind of an interesting thought, that Vike could have used the Ancient Dragons to overcome his connection to the Three Fingers. But then that also still raises the question of why he was thrown in jail, why he didn't get out of jail. Was he self-secluded so that way he could zazen himself out of the enthrallment of the Three Fingers? Maybe. Interesting ideas there. Joel said, Miquella wouldn't be the first time that FromSoft used Gautama's story for inspiration, Gautama being Buddha. In broad strokes, it's also the Nameless King's story. I could see that, yeah, for sure.
That Miquella and Radagon made and gifted incantations to one another, but at night, Miquella would leave the capital disguised as his alter ego Saint Trina. Miquella would wander around and see the suffering of others with his own eyes. In the cut Saint Trina quest, we are told that he eased the pain of the frenzied merchants. We also know he cared a lot for his twin sister.
Wait, did he say the content? Do I have a bingo reference? Let me back that up a little bit further.
Around and sees the suffering of others with his own eyes. In the cut Saint Trina quest, we are.
I'm gonna count that. Yeah, I don't personally like to entertain a lot of the Miquella content, specifically because of how much his story has changed from that content. Bro, okay, yeah, I need to be this. All right, so we got content. We have Miquella and Trina. Ooh, we're getting there.
Told that he eased the pain of the frenzied merchants. We also know he cared a lot for his twin sister Melania, who suffered rot from within, and the Golden Order couldn't do anything for her. After seeing a lot of suffering in the lands between, Miquella decided to make the Halic Tree a refuge for all races. We got the Albanorics, the Misbegotten, and many others. Miquella tried to cure the suffering of many races, but he failed. Then he tried something else. Just like the Buddha, he divested himself of everything: his title, birthright, power, and even his fate. 13 crosses all over the Shadowlands mark the journey of Miquella. 10 of these crosses have Miquella abandoning his physical flesh. His eye specifically is said to be the mark of being an Emberian. The last 3 crosses is where he abandoned his love, his fears, his doubts and vacillation. His love here refers to Saint Trina, not necessarily love as a whole. So we can see here the similarity between Miquella's journey and the great departure of the Buddha. Here comes the twist now. Unlike the Buddha that saw suffering and decided to teach people how to overcome it, Miquella decided to force kindness upon them using charms and brute force. Leda, the loyal follower of Miquella that preached kindness, was ready to slaughter anyone that showed any doubt. What's really interesting is that all of this bloodshed happens after breaking Miquella's charm. It's like the charm was the only thing keeping those people from killing each other. Unlike the Buddha's teachings, the compassion that Miquella promised was artificial. When we fight Miquella, we can see this with our own eyes. If you got grabbed twice, Miquella charms you and he steals your heart. He planned to do the same thing with the entire lands between. Yes, he would usher an age of compassion, an age of peace and no more suffering, but it's all fake. We can see here the twisted form of Buddhism that Miyazaki made. He took the Buddha and his story and made a twisted form out of it, a recurring theme in the Souls series. If you liked this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button and tell me what you think in the comments section down below.
Yeah, to a degree, I could definitely see the parallels between Miquella and Buddha, and as... Who was it who had just said that? I'm so bad at remembering things like that. Joel saying that the Nameless King is also kind of a repeat of that trope. I would agree with that as well. So, yeah, I enjoyed this video. There were a couple points where he said things that weren't entirely founded in the text of the game and seemed to be more inferences, which I did not enjoy. But hopefully by me pointing them out, we could be more cognizant of those kind of things. So, as always, I'm going to go ahead and link the video that we just watched into the chat if you guys want to show the Alchemist some support for their effort by either liking or subscribing to their content. And Mendacious Cat, welcome back in. You sneezed and then I immediately said who just said that. Great. And if you could throw out your anxiety and toss it away, you'd probably do it too. Just imagine if Miquella had the foresight to abandon his ADHD. Maybe he could have finished something for once. Rocky, you ugly cried over how they did your girl Trina. Okay, so there was something that I was saying that we were talking about with relationships to knowledge in Dark Souls, and there is a bit of a tie-in to Buddhism. I couldn't remember the phrasing off the top of my head. I can't remember the Sanskrit because I just don't. So the universe in Buddhism is Anatman, which is without self. And once you come into the realization that there is no such thing as self within the universe, within the paradigms of Buddhism, that can allow somebody the kind of freedom and permission, so to speak, to let go of their ego and return to becoming a Natman, which means without self, which ties into the Sokushin Butsu things that we were talking about with the tutelary deities and things like that. So unfortunately, I couldn't remember that off the top of my head at the time that it came up, but I also want to thank Rocky for, or no, that was Joel that time, for bringing up Atman. That triggered me memory a bit. Gigantosaurus is, again, the charm is not mind control. You basically are forced to love him and overwrite any other emotions. We could argue for quite a long time as to whether or not that should constitute as a form of mind control, or even if it's just an extremely strong power of suggestion. The fact that that suggestion is being placed into somebody's mind artificially, synthetically, in and of itself could be taken to be a form of mind control, if not like direct control. So for instance, if I knew somebody who had diabetes couldn't resist sweets, and so they didn't buy any sweets to like store in their house, and then I deliberately left out cookies knowing that they would go to eat them regardless, is that necessarily mind control? No, but I'm still kind of controlling their actions because I know they don't have the inhibition to stop themselves from eating cookies if they were left out. So TLDR, don't leave out cookies for diabetics, folks. Anyway, so it's not quite the same, but Miquella can do it even more directly than I would in that silly scenario. So anyway, let's go ahead and maybe check out a different video rather than silent ellipses between meanings, the world turned upside down. So as I said earlier at the beginning of the stream, we've had a bunch more Night Rain content come out, but this is one of the characters that I was most excited to learn about, and she just got a trailer today. I'm sure many of you may have already seen this already, but I watched it earlier today. I think it'd be fun to look at it again right now. So let's check out the Elden Ring Night Rain Revenant character trailer. Now, I don't necessarily think this might have a ton of lore significance, but it's cool. So here we go. Time for the frame by frame. Hey, Otawako. Nah. We do see some pretty cool stuff, though.
Peggy 16.
This video is so much louder than the other one. Hold on, let me turn it down. I can't tell what weapon she was just using, to be honest. I didn't look at that before. I think I was looking at the summon. Yeah, I was like, oh, it's a page. It's Karian related. Are these fist weapons? What? This is cool. They kind of remind me of fans. They're like claws. Yeah, I didn't even look at this. So is this a weapon or is this part of her character model? I'm assuming it has to be a weapon. Or maybe they're spells. So she uses harps to summon in other things. I really like that we get the gigantic Tibia Mariner, not Tibia Mariner, summon skeletons with their super eye lasers, which are like Comet Azure. Very excited about that. It's a new weapon, the silver claw thingies you see her wearing in her art. Okay. Oh, yeah. And then there was also a stream earlier today with content creators playing. I don't know if the Revenant was available for them to use. So I'm literally operating on just base trailer knowledge of the game, essentially. And that dude seems like he should be a skeletal form of gigantic Vamos, or more specifically, one of the pumpkin heads. Bruh, how peak would it be if they just used the Vamos voice filter on one of their characters? I would lose it if the Revenant sounded exactly like Vamos. Oh my god, that'd be so amazing. Is this a butterfly? Is this the moon of Noxtella? I don't know. There's some pretty interesting stuff with the Night Rain things, but I I don't know how canon I'm going to take it at the end of the day. Hey Mao, nice to see you again. So it looks as though she revives her teammates, but for those who don't know how revives work in Night Rain, you do that by attacking your allies when they're downed. So the thing that she did must just be a big AoE type spell or ability, but since the characters in these trailers are typically shown off using their abilities, I'm going to assume it's her ability, which is very interesting because we've seen multiple summons, so maybe we can find them throughout the map and she could use them a bit more directly. Maybe the other characters can too. But then we also have the character abilities, and I'm not sure which is supposed to be her ultimate, the summons or this thing. I'm assuming it's this thing since we've seen it the least. And then Otto was saying it didn't look like she was available for the live stream today, but early reviewers got to play her in other events. Okay, cool. Hey, Tanner, nice to see you. So we just finished up watching the Alchemist video about Buddhism and the Shadow of the Erdtree. And right now I wanted to double check the Revenant character trailer for Night Rain because it's cool. And nice to see you again, by the way. Mendacious, you'll enjoy watching the lore tubers take themselves way too seriously. It's gonna be fun turning myself into a pretzel. So yep, it's coming out real soon, guys. Alright, so that was fun. I've gone ahead and liked it. Let me go ahead and share it with you guys if you like the Night Rain trailer thing as well. So yeah, the Revenant herself, part of the reason I was excited about her is because Revenant as a term is just always super cool. Then you got this thing, which is one of my favorite not enemy things in the base game. She's got a harp. I love the harp. It's one of my favorite instruments. She's got the puppet finger hands, which is very evocative. Potential Ranny connections. And then, yeah. Oh, there's like a lady on the harp. Can you even call this a harp? Probably not. And it's got a bone. Huh. I'm not taking that like too lore seriously, but it's just kind of cool. This almost seems like star charty type stuff. I don't know. So you can see that her fingers are like a puppet's. So many people are wondering if she has any potential connections to Snowy Crones. Hi, little boy. What are you doing? Come here. Okay. Hey, Pigsy, nice to see you again. You're excited that FromSoft's doing an archer character? The archery in Elden Ring is a big step up from Dark Souls, but it's still a meme. Yeah, for sure. Archers have always been one of my favorite archetypes in video games. I can't remember what game this was, but when I was a kid, there was a game on the Super Genesis. I almost said Super Ningenesis, where you were a bunch of comic book characters, and my friend owned the game, and I typically played the archer guy that was in that. He was purple and green. I feel like Stella might know. I forgot her bare feet on that list. Get yourself a woman that looks at you like Miyazaki looks at feet. Well, honestly, I didn't notice she was barefoot. So we could add that to the list. And so her face is all cracked there. Okay, and this is the close-up of her cool weapon. So basically, damn it, I'm drawing a blank on what the stupid snacks are called. I'm ruining my own joke. They're certainly not Funyuns. They're not combos. Chat, what are the little corn chip things that are shaped like triangle pyramid things that are conical? Bugles, yes, bugles. She's got the bugles for weapons. That's what I used to do as a kid. I would put bugles at the ends of my fingers and pretend I was Freddy Krueger a little bit. And then as I got older, I was like, oh man, I haven't had bugles in years. And then I tried to put them on the ends of my fingers and they didn't fit. I was really disappointed. Hilko, you were the same? Hell yeah. That's what they're for. Hey, Zafe, nice to see you again. No, I am not going to watch that because the last time I did anything related to that song, I got demonetized within playing 4 seconds of that thing. But I've already been hating on it on the Discord. And then when I saw it, I was like, Zafe! It's all his fault. They hurt us. So yeah, some fun stuff. I'm really excited about her character. Honestly, I was hoping the Revenant wasn't going to be bad. He looks a lot cooler than I was hoping, to be real. So I'm really excited to check out the Revenant. I liked the Guardian from the network test, but I think that might have been because of the kind of synergistic items I got for the Guardian specifically. So yeah, I'm kind of excited for Night Rain despite everything. Being able to play the network test was certainly a big help for, inciting my desire to play it, especially now that I've beat Expedition 33 and Kazan right before Night Rain came out. It's kind of really perfect timing the way that those two games were laid out going into the launch of Night Rain, because I was trying to figure out what all I wanted to play before then, and we had some other options like Crab Souls, and then the Trippy Souls game that I always forget what it's called, and maybe some more types of Metroidvanias, but I really did have a blast with both Kazan and Expedition 33, so this year is pretty stacked in terms of games, because I think Crimson Desert's supposed to release later this year as well, and that one could be a banger. It's supposed to be, I think, a single-player follow-up to Black Desert, the MMO, but different, and so if you have a Korean game that's not an MMO and pay to win, it could be good, so just crossing my fingers for that. Tanner said, do we know if anything unlocked in the network test carries over to the full release for those who played it? I doubt it, but that's a really good question. Oh yeah, so in case anybody in the chat is not tracking it, we should reiterate as often as possible that Night Rain is not going to be cross-play between platforms. It's only cross-play between ecosystems. So PS4, PS5 has cross-play. The Xbox systems have cross-play. I don't know what they're called because it's annoying. Terrible naming conventions. And then I don't think Night Rain's coming out on the Switch, but maybe it'll be on the Switch too because Duskbloods will be coming out. But yeah, and PC, Steam is going to be its own ecosystem. So if you're trying to play Night Rain with your buddies and pals, you might need to do some pre-coordination so you who are on the PC or the PS system doesn't get screwed by a friend who bought it on the Xbox and whatnot. Oh, so you think Crimson Desert looks too good to be real? I'm a little bit curious and apprehensive about that as well, but yeah. The network tests never carry over. That's kind of what I thought, but who knows? Maybe there's a little bit of an Easter egg. I doubt it, though. And, okay, Global asked me what platform I've decided to get it on. So I'm hoping that my computer is good enough where I'll be able to play Night Rain on the computer and be able to stream it without it overheating. I mean, my computer really isn't bad. The worst that I'd have to do is, lower the settings, so it should be good, especially if I was able to play Kazan as well as it was going. So I'm assuming PC for myself, because if it eventually becomes moddable, I might do that, and I don't want to have to buy it on both the PC and PS5. And Robbie is correct. We do have Elden Ring coming to the Switch too with the Tarnished edition, so I think Night Rain could be a strong possibility as well. I haven't really looked at the Nintendo Switch 2 launch titles or anything like that, because I'm not going to buy the Switch 2 unless there's a bunch of games that I want to play. And of course, I'm probably going to get boned by Duskbloods, but yeah, time will tell. That means some new stuff for the Elden Ring base game too. Correct. I don't know how important the new item descriptions are going to be, but when I looked into the Japanese talks about the Switch 2 Tarnished Edition, I was like, okay, what the hell is this Lucatiel armor? I don't remember what it was called, but it was like... Hold on. I have it on the Discord. Maybe I should just look at my own messages. Oh yeah, Floor just asking me what it's called, and I couldn't tell you. It seems as though it's supposed to be Leo Teal. So it's the Leo Teal set. So yeah, stew on that, unless it gets localized to something different. Robbie, Elden Ring might be your first Souls game soon. You wish it was Sekiro, but you wouldn't go crazy just like you did in Salt and Sanctuary. Yeah, Sekiro is pretty tough if you're not used to those types of games by any means. Elden Ring is a lot more beginner friendly. The Shadow of Lucatiel, exactly. Okay, so that was fun. Let's go ahead and then check out our next lore video of the night with Silent Ellipses. Maybe I should just call him Silent Ellipses at this point. Between meanings, the world turned upside down, Elden Ring lore. So I talked about this possibility on the Miro board presentation of the analysis of the quote-unquote shadow of the Erdtree, and I do think there is an unironic strong possibility that the Skidoo tree could literally be upside down in a different realm / land from the Erdtree, and even further down the deep root depths, and the Erdtree and the Shadow Tree are probably connected at the roots at some point in history. So let's see what Silent Ellipsis brewed on the theory as well.
Like any good story, Elden Ring has both surface meanings and hidden meanings. But there are deeper secrets still, which we can only find by fully inverting our perspective. So let us seek out the roots of this story and see if we can find the invisible pull.
The world turned upside down.
To organize my content and make it clear when I'm speaking confidently, when I'm speculating, and when I'm focused on metaphor and themes. However, this means that there are some theories I have been intentionally hiding because I didn't want them to distract from the main points I was trying to make. But now that the grand unified theory is complete with part 4, and yes, you should go watch that after this, it's time for me to reveal what I've been...
Did I watch part 4? I'm pretty sure I did. Let me double check. Yes, okay. Good timing.
Holding back. Obviously, this means spoilers. Part of the punchline of this video is given away by the title, but there's a lot more we have to talk about, and I promise it will be interesting whether or not you embrace the speculative punchline. For if we can better understand the relationship between the lands between and the realm of shadow, we will learn more about birth, death, and the nature of the soul within Elden Ring's world. So how can we better understand this relationship? Well, we should consider how we enter the realm of shadow in the first place, through a link created by Miquella. Over the course of the DLC, we learned that Miquella knew exactly what he was doing, and that his actions in the base game were all working toward the goal of reaching the realm of shadow, and ultimately the Gate of Divinity. So thinking back to the base game, there are 3 major elements to Miquella's path to the Shadow Realm. There's the tree roots he embeds himself in, a ritual involving omen blood, and the eclipse. These elements seem completely unrelated, but with the effort Miquella put into bringing those elements together, there must be some intention behind it, especially because it works. If we start making individual connections, then these elements will all start to link together. So let's begin by discussing an evocative and mysterious item that holds a surprising number of clues for us.
Damn it, Helfen Steeple. I was going to say it's soap, because it's the most important item. Then golden poop. And yeah, Helfen Steeple.
Helfen's Steeple is a greatsword dropped by a Tibia Mariner in the mountaintops of the Giants. For many players, this will be the last Tibia Mariner they defeat, so it's essentially part of the conclusion to the Death Root hunting questline in the game. It reads, Great sword, patterned after the black steeple of the Helfin, the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. The lamplight is similar to grace in appearance, only it is said that it can only be seen by those who met their death in battle. There's a lot to unpack here. First, what is a lampwood? As far as I'm aware, this is a novel word used by the English localization team. The Japanese text uses Tomoshibi no Ki, which means a tree of light, or specifically a tree of lamplight, a lampwood. So the Helfin is a radiant tree, whose light guides the dead.
And this is also a weird part of the localization, because Helfin, from what I understand, maybe it's also used in other languages, and maybe that's where they drew the localization from. Helfin is a German word which means help, and help hen, but it's spelled with an F instead. So
next we have the word steeple, which is...
Oh yeah, I gotta pull out the bingo card, see where we are. Let's see. Japanese says we got him. Did we bring up previous games? I don't think so. World Tree, not entirely yet. Eyes, Archaeology, not yet. Actually, eyes did get brought up because we talked about Miquella's eyes in the last video. Well, the one before the last one, before the trailer. Oh, Helfin Steeple's on here. I forgot. Okay. Looking pretty good so far, huh? Okay. Because Miquella abandoned his eyes.
Is a spire or tower, particularly at the top of a church. This could be a metaphorical way of referring to the tree, but is more likely a description of a building at the base of the tree, which features a black tower that the sword is modeled after.
And to be fair, I do think that Helfin's Steeple is kind of one of those recurring weapon callback items from the previous games, such as the Morion Blade, or is that what it's called, the Demon Souls? And our chain-smoking friend uses the same thing in Dark Souls 3, and it has black flames. I can't remember what it was called in that one, but anyway.
Of course, saying that a sword looks like a building requires you to squint a bit, but there are some notable features, such as the sheer black appearance, and the branches near the base that look like flying buttresses. I guess Helfin's flying buttress didn't have the same ring to it.
He said but. All right, let me pull up the icons if he doesn't go into it right here. Okay, so Helfin's Steeple. What did I just do? How did that... What? Oh, I know what I did. I must have pulled it into the browser or something. Oh no. Okay, I lost it. Give me one moment to find it again. Well, that was annoying. Sorry about that. Gotta go all the way back down.
That the sword is modeled.
Yeah, for some reason, it wouldn't let me go back when I somehow dragged it into the browser like that. Oh, this is a little bit too big. All right, so flipping over the steeple, it almost seems as though there's like a doorway here or some kind of churchy aspect to it. So I don't necessarily think it's terribly wrong to say this thing could have been modeled after a building, to be fair. It doesn't seem very tree-like, that's for sure.
After. Of course, saying that a sword looks like a building requires you to squint a bit, but there are some notable features, such as the sheer black appearance, and the branches near the base that look like flying buttresses. I guess Helfin's flying buttress didn't have the same ring to it. In any case, with the release of the DLC, I don't think we have to guess what the Helfin looks like anymore, because we find, hovering over the landscape of the Realm of Shadow, a radiant tree with a black keep at its base, featuring a massive central tower and many flying buttresses. There's even a dedicated church district buried underwater that hints at a possible religious role this structure played prior to its current occupation.
It's interesting to call Helfin Steeple a reference to the Shadow Keep. I don't know. I don't like that. I don't hate it, but it just doesn't quite have that ring of truth to it to me. Maybe you guys feel a little bit differently, though. But I certainly think that there could be still room to argue that the Shadow Tree itself could be related to the Helfin, if not the Helfin itself. And I didn't get to completely flesh out a lot of those ideas yesterday on stream, but I did bring up things relating to candle trees or candlewoods, and I certainly think that there probably isn't much of a difference, if one at all, between a lampwood and a candle tree, functionally speaking, in terms of the lore there.
As I've pointed out several times, the dead were drawn in ancient times inexorably toward this now shadowed land, as explicitly stated in many different item descriptions. And now we have a new name for it. Before, it was called the Realm of Shadow, the land of the Helfin. Of course, after I'd finished the first draft of this script, Vati released a video where he brought up this same connection between Helfin Steeple and the Black Keep. That's reassuring to me on the one hand, but on the other, Vati makes a pretty clear mistake. He identifies the Helfin as the Black Keep itself, whereas the Helfin is explicitly a tree, while the steeple is a separate but related structure. The reason for this confusion, I think, is that Vati admits he's struggling to decide how old the Shadow Tree is. For me, however, there's no conflict to resolve, as I have always interpreted the Shadow Tree as the remnants of an ancient, holy tree, even older than the Erd Tree itself. Identifying it with the Helfin fits everything else in my interpretation. But we've still only discussed the first half of the item description. The second half says that the light of the Helfin was similar to grace, but can only be seen by those who met their death in battle. This feels like a nod to Norse mythology and the concept of Valhalla, but more importantly, this setup of a light that guides warriors who die in battle after their death is exactly how the story of Elden Ring begins. Marika banishes the Tarnished before our story begins, with express instructions for them to wage war and die, so that after their death, she can summon us back to the lands between through the light of grace.
Hey, I-Man, nice to see you again. And yes, True Connoisseur is correct. We do have Norse mythology popping up on the bingo. Norse inspiration right here. All right, so we're getting pretty close to potentially getting a bingo here, aren't we? All right, here we go.
As I've said before...
Wait, archaeology counts. I'm going to say the flying buttresses is good enough to me.
It is the light itself that guides us from death to the lands between. In short, I think this item description is being sneaky, because the light of the Helfin doesn't just look similar to the light of grace. It is the light of grace. Let's put it into the context of everything else in Elden Ring's story. Marika seals death away to create a land of unending life, the lands between. She takes light away from the land of the Helfin and casts that land in shadow.
And of course, that is debatable. I brought up how many different ways we could look at when the Shadow Tree itself came into being and potentially when the Land of Shadow was sealed, because arguments can be made in many different directions on both of those fronts. And so this is a little bit more of his personal interpretation rather than anything that's super concrete in the lore there, which he did kind of preface the beginning of the video with that. But anyway.
She sends the Tarnished away to fight and die in a foreign land so that after death, they can be summoned home by a light that can only be seen by warriors. Grace is the light of the Helfin tree, stolen away from it by Marika. The light used to guide the souls of the dead toward the afterlife. But that same light is now what guides us to continue being reborn in the lands between without respite. Honestly, that much doesn't even feel like speculation to me. But while we're here, let's do a little speculating about the actual name, Helfin. It does sound like the German word for help, so it could be trying to evoke an Old English phrase for the helping tree, since it serves as a guide. Could work, but while we're at it, how about a mythological reference? As far as I know, there's no mythological source for the word Helfin, but if we think of it as a compound, a possible connection emerges, because the first syllable, Hel, is a Norse name for both the afterlife as a location and for a being, one of Loki's children who presides over Hel, the place. Sort of like how Hades can refer to both the god and the afterlife in Greek mythology. And yes, the modern English word hell derives from this word, although the Norse conception doesn't include all the fire and brimstone. Still, it's fitting for a land connected to death to bear this name. And you can decide just how much weight to put on what I'm about to say next, but if we're already thinking about Norse mythology, then one of Hel's siblings is Fenrir, a wolf that was prophesied to devour the sun. So Helfen could be a portmanteau. If that feels like a stretch, it's fine. Just let that stew for now, and let's move on to discuss what the light of the Helfen has to do with Miquella.
Yeah, if we had more wolf-type connections or moon/Karian-type connections, I could potentially be on board with that. It would have been nice if even we had some more wolves of Radagon found in the Shadowlands, but we bafflingly do not. So, what's going on with that? Yeah. Anyway, Chapter 2, Memory of Grace.
We've identified the light of grace that revives the tarnished with the light of the Helfen.
Oh yeah, so before proceeding with this part too much further, I wanted to touch on the idea of those being fallen in battle getting called to the Helfen and whatnot. I think there is a lot of thematic overlaps between the way that Ghostflame itself is created and the way that Deathbirds try to create deaths that are worth offering. If you guys remember me talking about the concept of curses and impurity and strong emotions yesterday on stream, where those strong emotions go on to create curses, I think that's kind of what you get in a life and death battle with a Deathbird, or the kind of individual combat that leads to one's own private divinity in the Shadowlands with like the Red Bears and stuff. So these kind of life and death struggles are huge, pivotal centerpieces of the FromSoft catalog, with that being like the main theme of Bloodborne, essentially. It was a really big theme in Dark Souls as well, and then it gets brought back up in Elden Ring with one's heart singing before they die when they're fighting, and if they, conquer their foe, then they get to live again, but if they don't, then my headcanon conceptualization of all this is the way that it's said that one's life flashes before their eyes right before they die. I think the same thing is at play in Elden Ring, where if you know you're about to die because you're locked in mortal combat and they strike the final blow against you, you will have that kind of vivid flashback. But if it just kind of happens from a natural death and you don't really see it coming and you're not really feeling that adrenaline rush, you're not going to get the flash before your eyes, perhaps. And so that's just kind of what makes sense to me as to why memories and emotions would be tied together the way that they are in this game. And so that's why warriors' deaths were prized above all others in these games, to me at least. So yeah, I don't know how to feel about the Hel Fenrir tree, but it just doesn't hit for me. How do you guys feel about that?
We've identified the light of grace that revives the tarnished with the light of the Helfen, a light that guides the dead and particularly fallen warriors. But there's something even more specific we can note about this light. The first item we receive in Elden Ring is called Memory of Grace, and shows us an image of the light that leads us back to the lands between. Its appearance is that of the sun reflecting on water. In other words, the sun was serving the role of a lamplight, guiding...
Everybody always says that, and they take it for granted, which I understand why they do view the imagery working like that. But to pull another tired old trick out of my hat here and referring back to Dark Souls, I do think that it could be a potential riff on the black humanity sprites of Dark Souls 1 being black. In Elden Ring, maybe they're gold because it's related to the gold tree and grace of gold and all that. So there is more than one way to look at the Memory of Grace depiction there. All right, Robbie, you have a good night, and thanks for joining us. And good luck with Doom.
the souls of the dead towards a destination. I made a comment on one of Smotown's videos a while back, saying that the reason Mausoleum Knights are beheaded may be so that even in death they cannot see the light of the Helfin, and thus cannot be led away from the place they guard. This comment was basically a sneak peek at the connection I'm making here, because the crest of the Mausoleum Knights is the eclipse, and the concept behind the eclipse being a protective symbol for spiritual guardians seems to follow the same logic, avoiding the light that leads you away after death. So there is a link between the light of the sun, the light of grace, and the light that guides the dead.
I don't know about that, because if this were the case, I feel like Rancor and Rancorous spirits shouldn't be depicted with skulls, because what's then stopping them from seeing this proverbial light of the sun or the Helfin and following it and kind of coming at peace with the afterlife? So just kind of my thought there. And to me, the eclipse aspect, I think, is more relevant when talking about how it quote-unquote drains the sun of color, and that might keep things alive even after death if they've been drained of vitality. I don't know, though.
However, in the age of the Erd Tree, this light no longer guides the dead onward from the lands between. Instead, the dead are guided back to the Erd Tree itself, which shines night and day, disrupting the prior cycle of life and death, represented by the light of the Helfin. Which leads us back to a feature of Helfin's steeple I didn't explain yet. You might be wondering why the red gem that appears in the sword isn't represented by the golden light of grace, or in the current appearance of the Shadow Tree. But if you've watched my other videos, specifically duality and color theory, you might already know what I'm about to say.
Is it bingo? Nah, we're close.
Red is the color of dusk, and the color of destined death, which was removed from the Elden Ring upon the founding of the Golden Order. Moreover, we have several items explicitly saying that red was part of the primordial color of gold, prior to the current age. In short, the color of the light of grace did once contain red, when it led souls towards the realm of the dead. Its current gold color denotes the absence of death from the lands between. So what does this all mean for Miquella's eclipse? Well, we know that Miquella was concerned with severing the fate that he inherited, and some part of him needed to find its way to the sealed realm of shadow. If the light of the sun is now linked to the Erd Tree, and guides souls back to it, then it makes sense that Miquella would need to avoid this guiding light in order to find his way to a place that was hidden from both the living and the dead. And even though there's a spirit lamenting that their prayers weren't enough to bring about the eclipse, if you look up, you will see that the sun is absent from the sky over the mountaintops of the giants and the consecrated snowfield. This is also the only place in the base game where a deathbird can appear during the day.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well if he had not actually. Zaraki was saying red is not the color of dusk. I don't think he's trying to say it's the color of dusk as much as it would be a color associated with death, which I think is very fair considering the very vivid red coloration of destined death as well.
So there is a disconnect of some kind between the sun and the day in the mountaintops of the giants. This all helps to explain the importance of the eclipse. But what about tree roots? What do they have to do with reaching the Shadow Realm? In order to answer that, we need to discuss the other tree that has been giving lore fanatics a headache for the last 3 years.
Ooh, baby. Chapter 3, The Great Tree. One word.
There's an item in Elden Ring that, despite being common, seems to have shocking lore implications, at least in English. Root resin is a crafting material found most frequently in catacombs, and it says, resin secreted from the roots of the great tree can also be found near trees on the surface, material used in crafting items. The roots of the great tree were once linked to those of the Erd tree, or so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around great tree roots. In the first half, the great tree in question sounds like the Erd tree, and makes this description unsurprising. But the second half explicitly describes a separate tree that the Erd tree was connected to. This description is very contentious in the lore community, because the Japanese text is more ambiguous about the identity of a separate tree. It uses a compound kanji with characters that individually mean great, tree, and root, but it's unclear if this is a proper noun, or if it's singular or plural. So the description could be read to mean that the root resin is secreted by any sufficiently large tree. As you might guess, I'm going to lean into the great tree interpretation, for several reasons. Firstly, in Japanese, it still says that the Erd tree was connected to these separate great tree roots. So what trees are being referenced? And it still says that the catacombs were intentionally built around great tree roots. So why? Reading it as generic big tree roots doesn't provide any answers, and the language is clearly trying to communicate something important. Why are tree roots connected to death? And why was it important that the Erd tree was once connected to the roots of something else?
To be fair, I think this was a bigger point of contention before the DLC gave us any true remnant of another possible great tree, so just to kind of set that up there. It is also worth noting that many of the catacombs are found nearby minor Erd trees, which themselves seem to be kind of great trees relative to many of the other types of trees we find throughout the Lands Between. So I don't really think it is that much of a stretch to make the argument that the Erd tree could have been connected to great trees that were potentially different or things along those lines. Captini said, are catacombs built to sever roots from the Erd tree? I don't think so. True Connoisseur says, reminder that cut content said the Helfen steeple was a depiction of a mourning spire commemorating those slain by the life rune curse. So I'm assuming the life rune could be synonymous with the rune of death, but it was cursed. And that sounds like one of those things that's probably machine translated and is so far down the pipeline of cut content that it's really hard to take it seriously, especially when we compare it to how Miquella's story ended up changing by the end of the DLC, unfortunately.
Secondly, I think it's a mistake to discount the English text in general. You can find interviews with Ryan Morris, head of the English localization team, discussing frequent conversations with Miyazaki about the context for much of the specific English wording, and some of the English phrases he developed found their way back into the Japanese text.
He's also credited as the voice of Goldmask. I felt as though that was more of a joke credit because Goldmask literally doesn't say anything, so I'm assuming this is also shown as a joke, but it feels a little bit at odds with the actual dialogue, to say.
Both in Elden Ring and in prior FromSoft games. So at least a few translation differences could be the result of that additional context informing the language. Of course, actual mistakes can happen too, but I think we can discover meaningful hints about the lore by considering both the English and Japanese text together. Either way, In this case, reading the item as referring to a separate singular great tree is entirely consistent with the ambiguous Japanese text, and it's much more interesting. Nonetheless, in the base game, speculation about the nature of the great tree is difficult, because root resin is all we have to work with. Still, it tells us a couple.
That's not true. We also have the Deeproot Depths map description. I was a little bit surprised he didn't bring that up the first time, but it's still going to corroborate what he says, but in the interest of giving one as much context as possible, I want to show it off for you guys. Okay. So, map of Deeproot Depths and Environs. At the very depths of the Erd Tree's majestic roots lies the source of the Ansel and Shifra rivers. Here, too, begins the network of great tree roots that spread throughout the lands between. And so, that's consistent with what's said in the Japanese as well. So, the issue was, for me, was trying to determine if Ogonju here is meant to refer to the golden tree that we know of, the Erd Tree, or if this could be a reference to minor Erd trees. Although, to be fair, in other parts of the text where the minor Erd trees are brought up, we do have the character for small that's shown before them. So, with no other actual great tree to work with here, and the many other mentions in the Japanese text of the great tree referring to the Erd tree specifically, it is really hard to tell whether or not the great tree roots is a reference to the Erd tree or something else. And I already have all of this stuff set up from, previous rants about this subject, but Deathroot says, on the night of the dire plot, the stolen rune of death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the rune of death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the great tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. So that's okay. Okay, so the great tree connected to the Erd tree at one point in time, but we're also told that in the Prince of the Death's pustule that it came from the visage of the Prince of Death, he who used to be called Godwin. As first dead of the demigods, it's said he's buried deep under the capital at the Erd tree's roots. So even in English, the Erd tree is equivocated with the great tree and its roots. So it isn't quite as cut and dry as he's making it out to be. And yeah, because we also have things like the great tree being referenced in the Tree and Beast surcoat. And it says the surcoat depicts the distant Erd tree in English, but it's called the Great Tree and Beast surcoat in Japanese. And so if the Great Tree is depicting the Erd tree, then why wouldn't the Erd tree be considered the Great Tree in these other contexts? So it was messy in both English and Japanese, in my opinion. Pigsy asks, did they patch any translation other than Dusk-Eyed Queen? Beyond 1.0, I don't think there was anything significant. There might have been a couple changes, but that was the biggest one to be a little bit more consistent. And that was done in patch 1.06, if I'm remembering, or 105. It's either 105 had Dusk-Eyed, or it was 105 when it switched. How does the size of the Shadow Tree compare to the Erd Tree anyways? That's a really good question, Hilko. Maybe Zoli or some of the other data miners have checked. It'd be interesting to see. For what it's worth, knot resin does look a lot bigger than root resin, and it's used for the hefty pots. So we could assume then, if that's the case, that it's probably bigger, but I don't know.
Important things. Firstly, that the Erd tree was grown connected to a root system that is much older than the Erd tree itself. Secondly, that catacombs were intentionally built near the roots of the great tree, associating the great tree roots with death. During the time of the Golden Order, the function of this root system was to absorb the dead and return them to the Erd tree. But then, what did these roots connect to before the Golden Order? Well, we finally have a connection point from the DLC, because there is an analogous item found in the Realm of Shadow called knot resin. It reads, knot-shaped lump of resin, that exuded from the roots of trees, material used for crafting items, found near tree roots everywhere in the Realm of Shadow. Did you catch that? Root resin in the lands between is found in select places, specifically by the roots of the Great Tree, which are mostly found underground in catacombs. In the Realm of Shadow, however, the comparable substance is found everywhere. By the way, the Japanese text for this item lacks the kanji compound for Great Tree, and instead uses a more typical Japanese phrase for the roots of any old tree. So what does this tell us? Primarily that the Realm of Shadow is more closely connected to the Great Tree than the lands between is. In fact, one way of interpreting this is that root resin is concentrated in the Realm of Shadow and forms knots, because that's where the roots are leading. I've already pointed out that the Realm of Shadow draws the dead to it, and identified the Shadow Tree as the Hellfen. If Great Tree roots guide the physical remains of the dead in the same way that the light of the Hellfen guides their souls, then Erd Tree roots being connected to this ancient root system is yet another way that the Erd Tree is being used to co-opt death. For the roots used to lead one somewhere else. And we can see death traveling through the Great Tree roots in the game, in the form of Godwyn's Deathblight. The root system underneath the lands between is the means by which the lingering fragments of the Rune of Death have spread from Godwyn's corpse, and the curse of undeath has spread with it. Now consider that Godwyn was buried at the base of the Erd Tree, and we would expect him to therefore be reabsorbed by the Erd Tree. And yet, the lingering Rune of Death was not borne up into the tree, but spread out through the roots toward catacombs. We've been explicitly told that catacombs were built around Great Tree roots, and it almost seems as though these fragments of death were seeking these locations out, for we do not find Deathroot just anywhere in the lands between, but specifically in catacombs, or on Tibia mariners, who are consistently located near graveyards built into the earth. The way to the land of the Hellfen has been cut off, however. The description of root resin says that the roots were once connected to the Great Tree, meaning they...
I wonder how he feels about the Deathroot connection in Fair Missoula. Not that it really matters, it's just kind of what pops in my mind right now.
no longer are. Thus, the dead have been long left to wander. Tibia mariners are explicitly called servants of death in the description of Tibia's summons, and like the boatman Charon from Greek mythology, they were presumably intended as guides to the afterlife, at least until the way was shut. So what about Miquella, who was seeking a path of his own toward the Hellfen? Well, the connection between great tree roots and death helps to explain why Miquella's path might involve embedding himself in a tree. But there's another element here. Miquella's journey was supposed to end with his rebirth, a fact represented twice over by his cocoon resting upon a great pelvic bone, a ritualistic womb. But in the world of Elden Ring, what exactly does it mean to be born, or to be reborn?
Oh no, are we going to actually have the Urge Rebirth theory come out? Chapter 4, Born Anew.
I have consistently claimed that the Golden Order is founded upon trapping living things in a cycle of rebirth within the lands between. While the exact mechanism is open to some interpretation, there are numerous textual references to the lands between containing a curse of unending life. And we as players experience an extreme version of this, repeatedly dying and being resurrected as we play the game. As is the case throughout the Souls series, this is implied to be part of the literal narrative of the game. Our character is actually dying and reviving repeatedly. This, in turn, is implied to be directly connected to the guidance of grace and Marika's favor. After all, that's how we Tarnished were each resurrected in the first place. Many Tarnished NPCs claim they no longer see the guidance of grace, and the implication seems to be that once they've lost divine favor, they will no longer revive after their next death. We are something of a rarity, a tarnished who sees the guidance of grace, a being who has been selected for expedited revival. By contrast, the demigods have been forsaken, and upon their defeat, none of them return, at least not on a timescale that matters to us. But whether the Erd Tree revives you quickly or not, we're still talking about a narrow kind of rebirth. A person's body being reanimated or reformed, their soul largely intact. In a time before the Golden Order, how did things differ? We get a significant hint from Renala's Amber Egg.
I am curious when he thinks the Golden Order came into being. I don't remember if he said that in any of his previous videos, but part of the reason why I bring this up right now is because we're told from Miyazaki's interview with the overture of Elden Ring, if I'm remembering correctly, that the way the Tarnished avoid death is different from the demigods, because the demigods are affected by the removal of the Rune of Destined Death, or the removal of the Rune of Death, which is Destined Death, and the Tarnished are brought back by grace. So, to me, I've legitimately wondered if that means the Tarnished get brought back through grace because the Rune of Death hadn't been removed at that point. And so, even now, I'm still unsure whether or not the Golden Order technically starts with Radagon's ascension to Elden Lord, or when America and Godfrey come on to the scene. So,
which is able to birth people anew. Muriel calls this a forbidden rite. But how does it differ from Erd Tree reincarnation? I mean, aside from the fact that it lets you reallocate your stats.
It keeps the Erd Tree out of this cycle.
The key may be the other necessary ingredient
Silver.
for being born anew, larval tears. The version we find in the base game is made of silver, and like all silver things, is a creature of mimicry. In other words, this is an imitation of something that was once connected to the concept of rebirth. And the original can be found in the realm of shadow, as the DLC version of the larval tear is not made of silver, but is said to be a creature that burgeons from spirit graves, and is neither flesh nor spirit, but something in between. This item looks unmistakably like a fetus, and is found at night in the middle of a circle of spirit graves. With that in mind, there is new context for Renala's speech immediately following her boss fight, where she asks the now absent scholars, "Or would you be gravestones, to be better born anew?"
I really like that observation. That is quite a nice one.
It was easy to dismiss this line in the base game, because Renala is framed as being a bit unstable. But what if she's hinting at something important about birth?
To be fair, she also does turn the scholars into gravestones before she smashes you with them and can one-shot your character if you aren't ready for that.
So we know the Realm of Shadow draws the spirits of the dead to it, making it a kind of afterlife. But this land is also tied to the energy of the Crucible and to new life. Is that a contradiction? Not at all, because Elden Ring repeatedly connects the ideas of death and birth. Scarlet Rot is an accelerated cycle of death and rebirth, as noted by Gowry and by several item descriptions. Consider Poison Armament, which says, "Those who dwell within poison know rot all too well, the death that begets life, that comes to all equally." That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice. Similarly, the ancestral followers also worship death that begets life, as noted in the Regal Ancestors' Remembrance, which reads, "Life sprouts from death, as it does from birth, such is the way of the living." Indeed, the nature of the Crucible as a force of creation within the world reflects the relationship between causality and regression. Divine essence divides new life to create individuals, and then individuals are drawn back together as they seek to reconnect to the divine. This is a pattern expressed in the jarring ritual of the Hornsent, in the god-devouring serpent, and in the graven mages who study the primeval current. These are all forms of regression, imitations of the crucible. Even our player character collects the runes of countless foes and combines them within themselves as they draw ever closer to the divine Elden Ring. So then, the Realm of Shadow isn't simply an afterlife. It is a place where the souls of the dead are drawn so as to reconnect to the energy of the crucible and be born anew. We can see multiple steps in this process throughout the DLC, for there are wandering spirits who are still caught up in the trauma of their death and loss. But there are also spirits contemplating graves, or even stacking stones ritualistically.
So I wonder if he's going to tie in the tree to the sun because, the shadow sunflower and the eclipse being the moon guiding spirits to trees to be reborn with the power of the sun in the crucible. I could see those types of connections. I don't know if he's going to go that full Pepe off near, though. Hey, Zero, nice to see you again.
As though building gravestones. Now consider the spirit gravestone item, which says, in places to where the dead have been brought since antiquity, the oldest gravestones turn into spirits and then fade away. We see such spirit graves throughout the DLC, and on rare occasions, a circle of them produces a larval tear. A fuller picture is beginning to emerge. The land of the Helfin was a place where spirits came after death to find peace, to let their trauma and their individuality slowly fade until they were ready to connect to the energy of the crucible and be born anew.
Well, I really like that idea. I just don't think there are enough of the larval tears themselves to kind of work out that way to fit the grandiose scale of how much life is in the lands between. Maybe you could argue that this is just kind of a truncated view of things. We could also ask ourselves if the spirit eels are related to the larval tears, and if the larval tears would go on to create the spirit eels and things like that. So anyway, I do think these are really interesting observations and whatnot.
The true larval tear we find in the DLC is a new soul ready to be born. And in turn, this connection between birth and death leads us back to the connection between dusk and dawn. For in a time before the Erd Tree, the dead were led to the land of the Helfin by the light of dusk to find rest. But new souls were also beckoned to the lands between by the light of the dawn. In this context, the importance of Marika's people, the shamans, also becomes more clear. They were caretakers for spirits, guardians and guides of those yet to be born. In this context, it makes a great deal of sense that Marika would be a conduit for the energies of life, and herself a spirit tuner.
Sorry, he said Glowmide Queen. I was looking at other things and listening.
The shamans also
Let me back up a little bit further.
the light of dusk to find rest. But new souls were also beckoned to the lands between by the light of the dawn. In this context, the importance of Marika's people, the shamans, also becomes more clear. They were caretakers for spirits, guardians and guides of those yet to be born. In this context, it makes a great deal of sense that Marika would be a conduit for the energies of life, and herself a spirit tuner. By contrast, the Hornsent are a people not native to the land of the Helfin, who found their way physically somehow to this place, and as a result had their bodies gradually transformed by the energy of the crucible.
Oof, yeah, I don't know about that one, especially because we're told that the land was failed, so is he saying that this land was always separate, but then Marika closed the door after the fact? maybe that is a possibility that I admittedly didn't really cover too much in my analysis yesterday. That might be worth exploring and diving into a bit more as well. Hilko asks, wet nurses? I don't necessarily think so, but to give a little bit of context to support what Silent Ellipsis was saying here a moment ago, that if the Miko are stewards of spirits for rebirth, then it might be important to consider how the Hornsent were mashing the flesh of their criminals into the Miko so that way they could be reborn anew as good people, not the actual saints that's used in the English localization there.
They came to see these transformations as a sign of providence, rather than a sign that they were meddling with energies they were never meant to. And as we all know, this arrogance led to extraordinary tragedy, inflicted by them and then upon them.
And so with that, I feel like you should also try to explain why red bears and other physical creatures would be in there, and then why the Hornsent specifically should be considered more invaders, especially when we have Hornsent without horns, like the little monumental boys within Inir Lim and Beliarat and all that. So, yeah.
So thematically, we can see that Marika's rejection of death is connected to her inability to let go of her own trauma. She has created an age of unending life, where the scars of the past cannot fade. And so, untold years after leaving the Realm of Shadow behind, she nonetheless sends a crusade back to it, to try in desperation to stamp out her own painful memories. We also have a connection back to Miquella's attempts to reach the Realm of Shadow, for Omen blood is infused with the energy of the Crucible. Perhaps Miquella needed Mohg's blood as a way to deconsecrate himself, or perhaps it helped to connect him to the Crucible and lead him back to the place where true rebirth is possible. So I'm painting a pretty elaborate picture about the connection between birth, death, and trees, but I haven't actually gotten to the topic of my title. I think that all of these connections are helpful, but it's time for me to take off the gloves and climb out to the farthest branches of the limb. Maybe that metaphor is getting away from me, but the point is that the final chapter of this video is going to involve some wild speculation. Rather than...
So while I do appreciate him pointing that out, it does make me a little bit more... maybe agitated isn't the right word, but maybe agitated that that kind of automatically frames the rest of what he was saying as being a bit more concrete than it actually was at times.
And couching it in qualifiers, I'm just going to give the wild ideas to you straight. And if you're still with me so far, it might make a frightening amount of sense to you.
The upside down.
Approximately 1,000 commenters reacted to my Central Sea video, and many of them said some variation of, how can the Realm of Shadow be physically separate if the suppressing pillar is at the center of the lands between? Well, here's one way. The Realm of Shadow could be literally underneath the lands between, upside down. Or vice versa, if you're thinking from the perspective of the Helfin, and see the lands between as the derivative land.
I like this idea for a number of reasons, but one thing which really throws me off, and this might be silly, is that the moon is in the same location relative to the compass in the so-called upside down. So it doesn't seem as though it should be literally upside down. And yeah.
A handful of commenters actually arrived at similar ideas on their own, and it took some restraint for me not to give them each an immediate high five. But first, let me elaborate. We have the paired description of root resin and not resin, telling us that the roots of the Erd tree were once connected to the roots of the Great Tree.
Gigantosaurus says, nah, it's on the moon. I actually really like that idea, unironically, except for the fact that we can see the moon. So maybe, does that imply that we are on the black moon? We are told that it was believed a moon fell on the moor, at least. So... wait, you know what? Now that I think about it, I should probably think about that idea even more, because if Moor Ruins was a Hornsent location, then that would imply the moon that allegedly fell on it was a post-Hornsent time construct thing. And that might tie into the Nox, perhaps, but maybe not. It could just be a reference to Rolana literally flattening the village, of course. Anyway.
In the base game, this substance is...
Oh yeah, so I don't think I actually went to elaborate on why I like that idea that Gigantosaurus popped up. Because as soon as he said that, that made me have a little bit of a mental flashback to... What's it called? The Carian inverted statue? Maybe I should just type in inverted and hope for the best. Okay, nope, Carian inverted statue. When we look at the Carian inverted statue, what is this dude pointing up to? The moon. But when you look at it in game, I think it's the other way around. Do I have footage? Study hall? One of them gets different. Maybe it's part of the description. Are they pointing up to the moon or the ground? Maybe it's after the fact. So it might be the one in Caria itself. In regular Caria, like when you go into the Church of the Cuckoo, which could imply that they're on the moon pointing to Earth, which I think is a neat idea. But anyway, I don't remember enough of the specifics off the top of my head. Mao, why did you say orichalcum? Did you type in the chat instead of Google search? Seems a little bit random.
Were once connected to the roots of the Great Tree. In the base game, this substance is dramatically more common underground, even though there are numerous trees on the surface, and we'd expect the roots of the Erd tree to be drawing it upward. So this seems to corroborate the lore text, that this substance is primarily found around Great Tree roots. What does it tell us? That an even more concentrated version of this item is found, quote-unquote, everywhere in the realm of shadow. What it tells me is that there's a stronger connection between the Great Tree and the Shadowlands, which in turn means one of two things. Either the Great Tree is another nickname for the Shadow Tree, the Helfin, or the Great Tree is an even greater tree that reaches across entire worlds, akin to Yggdrasil from Norse mythology. And the Shadow Tree is simply a much older offshoot of this unfathomably great tree, whose roots reach into both realms. Either way, the main takeaway is that the Helfin, the tree now known as the Shadow Tree, is much older than the Erd Tree, and that these two trees and two realms were connected by the root system underground. Indeed, the Helfin was likely the vessel of the Elden Ring, immediately before Marika tore it out and embedded it into herself. The Helfin's loss of its internal light is what transformed it into the Shadow Tree, a tree that bears no sense of order. So if there was a pre-existing system of underground roots that helped to draw the dead...
And I think a lot of these ideas are not really that far-fetched, especially basin. I didn't want to say the root of the Erd tree, but like the heart of the Erd tree, and it kind of sprang up as a byproduct of the Erd tree. And so if you have a shadow of the Erd tree, then perhaps a similar principle should be at play there. Indeed.
Head towards the center of the lands between, and then down toward another realm, then it makes sense that the Erd tree would need to be connected to that root system in order to redirect the flow of death, and that Marika would then try to sever the connection the roots shared with the Great Tree in order to contain life and death within the bounds of the lands between. Similarly, we see numerous sea vessels wrecked and scattered along the coast of the lands between, along with a great fog just beyond the coast, separating the continent from whatever lay beyond. I think this fog is as much metaphysical as it is physical, a boundary line where the rules of reality enforced by the Erd Tree end, where directionality stops being a meaningful concept. So rather than simply sailing around a traditional globe, I think that those who cross the fog need something to guide them or draw them to a location, as the light of grace does for us at the beginning of the game. That same light of grace once guided the souls of the dead to the other side, the place that all manners of death drift to. This also tells us how America managed to leave the realm of shadow to begin with. The light that guides one across the fog was already under her control. So, is the realm of shadow the other side of the world? An upside-down realm under the lands between? There are some surprising images and concepts that begin to make sense with this idea in mind. Consider, for example, the Carrion inverted statue, given to you by Ronnie during her questline. It unlocks a secret by turning the Carrion study hall, leading to the Divine Tower, upside down. The figure in this statue looks very similar to Count Emir, as has been noted by many others. Emir himself is in the realm of shadow, and seems to have had quite the epiphany since he arrived there. Also consider the sigil for gravity sorcery. Many have noted that it looks more like magnetic field lines than it does like a depiction of gravity, because what it depicts looks like a highly polarized force, implying a strong gravitational up and down, perfectly mirrored. And this even ties into color theory in a surprising way. If you've seen my celestial color theory video, I mentioned that the color purple consistently represents boundary lines, such as twilight being associated with the boundary between life and death, or St. Trina's sleep being a boundary line between the conscious and unconscious worlds. Well, now we have a way to fit purple gravity magic into that framework, because the gravitational center of the world is a boundary line between these two inverted realms. In fact, we see this color relationship expressed pretty directly in Shadow of the Erd Tree.
I would have liked that idea a lot more if you could see more gravity aligned things with the suppressing pillar, but alas.
Where there is a color mapping between depth and hue along the southern portion of the DLC map. In Karo's Hidden Grave, everything is red. Then lower down along the Cerulean coast, everything becomes blue. And finally, when we go underground into the Stone Coffin Fissure, everything is purple. Now, obviously there's a connection to St. Trina down here, but the total effect of this transition is nonetheless to show you the visible light spectrum, from red to violet, expressed in terms of height as you descend toward a boundary line. Okay, so what about the origins of this upside-down realm? We know that a golden star bearing...
Gigantosaurus asks, where is green? That is in Rao, which is, I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I enjoy it to a degree, but then I think that gets muddied and mucked up a bit with the lands between fitting into that as well, especially if you're going to say the lands between is higher than the Shadow Realm, or should you invert the two lands when you get to the tree sections? I don't know.
Bearing the Elden Beast was sent by the Greater Will to the lands between. But what would it look like if a divine creature of that stature actually fell to the earth? We get a hint by seeing a smaller scale version of this event in the game after Radahn's boss fight. A star falls, and it doesn't just impact with the surface, but tears the earth asunder, creating a great chasm and a new path that leads us down to to the eternal city of Necron. This immediately made me wonder if the other paths leading underground were originally formed by similar impacts that later had elevators installed in them. For that matter, why is there such a large underground space to begin with? Consider the concept art for the Lands Between, which shows the center of the map more obviously in the shape of an enormous crater. We can go underground ourselves and look in the direction of this crater, and if we do, we see an enormous, seemingly bottomless chasm, as though something tore through the earth and never stopped. And then we have the Realm of Shadow, which has its wildly irregular geography, as though it were made of mismatched pieces, or made by a violent event that pushed the land up quite dramatically out of the sea. And we know that this is where the Elden Beast ended up, because this is the land where Marika found it and embedded it into herself. Here...
Yeah, I don't know about that, because we also have things relating to Farum Azula. Maybe Farum Azula got left out of the timeline, and it could have been originally in the Realm of Shadow. I don't really know. The depiction of the Elden Ring in Farum Azula doesn't necessarily have to imply that the Elden Ring was in Farum Azula, but I don't know how straightforward his theories are with this. Although I do think there is a little bit of credence to that idea if one thinks that the Crucible is related to the Elden Beast because of the Elden Ring connection and the Erd Tree kind of absorbing the aspects of the Crucible. I think that's pretty fair, but we don't know if that originated there or if this is where it started to gain power, and so I'll kind of leave that there for now. Gigantus said, what if the veil in the Lands of Shadows was removed in the Shattering? How warm would be different? How would that be different? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, to be fair. That's kind of a hypothetical that I can't really answer because that doesn't seem to be the case. And then Zyro, welcome back into the stream. Maybe pre-flipped the Realm of Shadow had Farum Azula floating above. Maybe, I don't know. We have all those comments about the true storm raging over Stormvale back in the day, which might also be relevant. But I need to think about this a bit more.
Here, several divine forces were unified. The Crucible, the Elden Beast, and the now separate runes of death and the unborn were all merged within this tree prior to Marika's ascension. And that means that the sun, the metaphysical representative of these forces in the world, had a unified role as well. I like to imagine that the sun rose out of the Helfin each day and then circled the entire world, guiding new souls to be born with the dawn, and then guiding the lost souls of the dead back to the tree each dusk. But I don't have any evidence for that particular mental image, which makes it a good time to remind you all that I am perfectly aware of how speculative I'm being. Is the Realm of Shadow the literal upside down? Well, it could be, but the truth is that the literal orientation of things isn't the important part. If you prefer, the Realm of Shadow could be viewed as a different dimension, or a totally different world. Those are coherent. The important part is recognizing the relationship.
For what it's worth, I don't know how much the dimensional aspect should be considered if the death roots could infiltrate the Great Tree root network to show up in both lands. So maybe you could say that the tree serves as a metaphysical bridge between the dimensions. Perhaps I could see that, but it's still kind of just annoying to me, and that's not really Silent Ellipse's problem at all, as much as it is a me and a game/storytelling issue, perhaps.
Between these different concepts and divine forces we've discussed. The point is that the roots underneath the Lands Between serve as a connection to other places. That the Shadow Tree once had a totally different identity that was stolen from it by America, and that the process of being born anew is, in fact, different from rebirth through the Erd Tree. For me, this image of the world turned upside down is interesting because, whether it's true or not, it has helped me to draw many connections that I'm not sure I would have seen otherwise. You can take or leave the specific image here, but I've had this in the back of my mind for months, and I continue to be surprised by just how cohesive a theory it produces. There are even more crazy details I could go on about, but this video already has several times the wild idea quotient of my others, so I'll save some of those for another time. If you're interested in a more theme-focused analysis of Elden Ring, I am quite proud of the conclusion to the Grand Unified Theory I recently put out, so I do recommend that. From here, I do have even more Elden Ring thoughts to share, but I wanted to get this video out specifically because it contains my wildest current theories, and I wanted to make sure I had expressed them in some form before I get caught up in plans for other videos that may branch out a bit. My next video might be one that features Souls games in the context of larger video game history, but we'll see if that script comes together nicely or not. At some point, I also plan to release a review of common questions and comments about the Grand Unified Theory that I'll probably call Gut Check. But I'll probably take a little while longer to gather ideas and feedback before actually making that. In the meantime, make sure to let the algorithm know that this is some engaging content, and to share with anyone who thinks that your own theories are too outlandish. Till next time.
So I enjoyed a lot of aspects of that video. Of course, there were some things that I took umbrage with, and that's just kind of a common theme of my streams. So, as per usual, I'm going to link Silent Ellipsis' video to you guys in the chat if you want to give him some support. So, right. I do have some notes that I wanted to talk about in relation to the thoughts expressed in the video with relation to the Great Tree and the Helfin, because it seemed as though he was hinting at something more, but he didn't quite go super far to elaborate on what he meant about like kind of a world bridging tree idea. So one of the questions I have would be that if he thinks the Helfin tree was the shadow tree, how exactly he thinks it was changed. It sounds as though he thinks it was changed when America came and stole the Elden Ring. He didn't talk about the Rune of Death or the Golden Order specifically. That's fine. I don't really have an issue with that. But if he thinks the prior tree was a Helfin tree and it talks about a lamp wood, he thinks that all of the lamp wood references are more to Grace specifically, it sounds like. I guess that's fine. But one of my questions would be, does he think that the lamp wood is more akin to a candle tree? And if so, why does the version of the shadow tree that we see not really look like a shadow tree? Why does it have two stalks? Those are some of the thoughts that he could have explored a bit more. And then, of course, the Crucible connections is very important to whether or not the Helfin was the Crucible and things like that. And if the Helfin was a bigger deal, then it would have been nice to see some more elaboration on the Hornsent's relation to it, as well as the soldiers of Mesmer. Although we do have some of that stuff in the game, like the shadow tree being depicted on their armor. My question would be that why would America allow them to have those depictions on their armor if it was an older tree? And of course, this isn't really a problem strictly related to Silent Ellipsis' video. I think that's just kind of a big question in general. And of course, you can't really hit on absolutely every topic in one Elden Ring lore video, because this one is already 43 minutes long, and it's just an astronomical amount of work trying to plan for every contingency. And even if you do so, there are still certain things that are going to fall between the cracks. And we all need look no further than my 3-hour stream last night, not even getting to all of the ideas that I've had over the months since Shadow the Erdtree is released, and why it's been taking me so long to kind of collect all of my thoughts, really verify if I'm actually comfortable with many of these things, or if it's just all truly unhinged speculation, a house of cards that'll come tumbling down once one card gets knocked away. I think in some ways it feels like that, but in other ways it's like a house of cards that's been glued together, where you might be able to knock down a card or two, but you can still see the overall structure of everything, which in some ways is even more annoying. Rare Wabox, welcome on into the stream. React to Simon Bray. Who or what is Simon Bray, and why should I react to them? Hilko said he likes the idea if the Lands of Shadow is below. It sort of makes sense that the spirals are more prominent as a theme. And that was something I was considering as well throughout watching this video, that if the spiral is supposed to send things up, is the Erdtree kind of the end result of spiraling energies reaching divinity, I guess? Mao, you think the Helfin is like the imaginary tree from Honkai or something? A metaphysical structure was how you understood it. I don't have any interest in playing Honkai Star Rail, so I don't entirely know what you're talking about, but I tend to think of the Erdtree as both physical and metaphysical, so I don't know if there's any significant differences beyond that. Hilko said, in a way, the Erdtree would get in between the world and the true heavens. And then, of course, you could say that could be like why it's called the Lands Between, perhaps, but I'm just thinking about the Elden Beast and its arena and all of the pseudo gold trees we see in the distance, and the fact that we're kind of in a cosmic space is kind of interesting as well. It isn't Honkai Star Rail, it's Honkai Third Impact. That's really not different to me. Hilko said, isn't the most prominent spiral in the Lands Between that powerful glintstone sorcery spell? Glintstone Spiral? Or there's another one. Isn't it called a comet? It's a comet type thing, isn't it? The spirals in the base game seem more metaphysical and more quote-unquote occult, as obviously the Golden Tree is the most holy thing. To be fair, we are told that the Crucible incantations are spirals or whirlpools. What do they call them in English? I know it's always Uzu in Japanese, which means like whirl or whirlpool vortex. Siluria vortex or Dovis's Siluria's woe or Dovis's vortex. And then in addition to those, we have the briars also being represented in spirals, believe it or not. Don't we respawn in a spiral? I would need to double check. Eldon said the one comet spell was Comet Shard. Thank you, sir. I think you could argue there's also spirally type imagery that goes along with Comet Azure and maybe the equivalent giant laser beam. The Spirit Springs are spirally too. Yes, that is definitely true. And of course, the Golem-Eyed Queen's Black Flame Blade is a spiral as well. Your point is, it's all distinctly not physical like in the Land of Shadows. That there aren't physical shadows? Well, I would say that even the Land of Shadows doesn't have a lot of physical spirals. Mao says Tengen Topa Garen Lagan spiral power. Yeah, it's all a drill to pierce the heavens. Hilko says it's full of those Solomonic columns. Are you talking about the lands themselves or like the archaeology? Because I mean, we definitely know the Hornsent are spiral coated. I'm not trying to argue against that. All right, Elden Enthusiast, you have a good night. Thanks for joining us. You meant the Land and Shadow in general. We see much more spirally themed stuff in the actual physical stuff. So hold on, let me reread some of your comments. So you're saying the spirals in the base game seem more metaphysical and more occult rather than like actually worshipped by the denizens. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. And I think some of that is because of whitewashing by America as trying to institute herself as the quote-unquote one true God and whatnot. It's also interesting that the two fingers we see aren't spiral based, but Medders kind of are, but are also kind of not. A literal drill to pierce the heavens is the way of the tower used to get to the gate of divinity. I don't know. I think there's something more going on with the gate of divinity and all of the sacrifices. It would be really nice to know if there was a crucible connection to the gate of divinity or what that was all about. Because if the crucible is a tree, I could see arguments that the Hornsent could have used a mass sacrifice ritual to get the seed of the Erd tree that would go on to create the crucible. And that could have been the finger connection that we were always looking for. And why those seeds are thought not to exist. But yeah, it's really weird trying to fit the two fingers into everything. It's so damn annoying. And Midra doesn't help anything. She doesn't really hurt anything other than the fact that we know that she was the mother of the fingers. And then there's the stuff with the forges, which almost seems to put the concept of manipulating gold at odds with what the two fingers teach us. Mao said, it is a joke, but the Hornsent do say that the spiral was sent to the heavens or something like that. No? Sort of. It says they're supposed to reach God, even in the Japanese script, which is very weird, considering the rest of Elden Ring's pedigree. Like, what God are they reaching? Because, well, we certainly have the God as the divinity, the vessel of the vision of the Elden Ring. That could be one possibility. But a lot of what annoys me about that is the depiction of the Elden Ring in Fair Missoula. I think really the only way a lot of that makes sense would be if that depiction of the Elden Ring was added later in the timeline than the actual inception of Fair Missoula. But even so, we still have the stuff with Placidusax allegedly being an Elden Lord to consider as well. And none of this really fits together super nicely, which is very, very frustrating. And that could have been another thing that Silent Ellipsis could have touched on a bit more directly. The Fair Missoulan connection to everything, which I don't blame him for at all. Because it's not as though I've been harping on it throughout this video either. There was only like a tiny bit. Iman said there's a theory that Ronnie's fingers were the genitals of Midra and Ronnie cut them off. That sounds silly to me. Although, no, that does sound silly because Midra like bursts things in front of us. Jacob always thought the Gate of Divinity is itself a crucible, one made from only human pieces. Using it could change the soul of someone. Like a melting pot? Okay, I see what you mean. It's a little... I wish we knew more about the purification chamber before the Gate of Divinity. Rocky said it's from the castration video you mentioned. Okay, if you guys have suggestions for videos you want me to watch, you could always leave a comment on the live stream themselves, not the chat room, because I'll forget about it after I close the stream. So I'll get the notification later and then I can add it to my list or something like that. Or you could also leave a comment in the Discord on the channel feedback section, and then I could eventually add it to things to react to when I stream as well. Mao said, maybe the spiral architecture isn't in the base game so much because there isn't a need to reach God anymore since America's already there as its vessel. We do have the Glow-Eyed Queen stuff, as well as, interestingly enough, Miquella going to challenge that notion later. But yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the whitewashing of history was done on the part of America to cover up her relationship to the Two Fingers and the genesis of the Erd Tree, surprisingly enough. Jacob, you always felt the purification chamber was where you spiritually cleansed yourself before entering the sacred/divine area with the gate, sort of like a bridge to a Shinto shrine. Now, I would agree with that thematically, but I don't want to say literally because it's a video game, but what fundamental practices do they do to purify themselves? Because there isn't the misogi of using water. It's just kind of an area that seems to be filled with ash. Maybe people were burned to be cleansed to go in there. Maybe that's where they lost their bodies like Miquella did. But Miquella was already discarding parts of his bodies throughout the Land of Shadow, which is a choice. And then we have all of the little monumentals there, which are mummified corpses, presumably, not statues who are just chilling. And none of those guys have horns, whereas the Gate of Divinity itself is made out of the remains of bona fide Hornsent, because you can see the horns on their corpses and stuff. It's really strange. And then I was going to say something else about the purification thing. Oh, yeah. So, for whatever reason, Romina's Ash of War on her blade, pole blade of the bud, or whatever it's called, is called Romina's Purification. And she sings it twice, and that was supposed to have been something that she did to purify the Hornsent back in the day, which is like, wait a second. Did she decapitate Hornsent to purify them? What is this? Is this like a bloodletting thing? Does this have something to do with the former bud, and was it just devoid of scarlet rot? Like, what the hell is going on with Romina's pole blade is something that I've been thinking about, not super recently, but just, within the last couple months in looking at all of this stuff. Pixie thinks the spiral isn't there because the spiral is a spiral of conflict between life and death, yin and yang. America removes one half of that system, death, so the spiral is removed. She cuts off one braid. That is kind of how I view it as well, which is what Silent Ellipsis was talking about in the earlier portions of the video. Rocky said it's a thing done with a stick by a shrine maiden. I'll need to look into that myself. What are you doing, Loco? Logo says Wilder mains rise up. Yeah, so may as well ask you guys, what are you looking to maining if you guys are going to get Night Rain, and are you going to get Night Rain? I've definitely gotten a number of comments saying, like, I'm not going to buy that game, which, I mean, I'm really not going to blame anybody. I do feel like they could have definitely done more. I'm probably going to ride a little bit because I don't think they're going to truly include things like limb breaks or a better stance posture system indicator in Night Rain, which is like, come on, guys. If you're going to be reusing this many assets, it'd be really nice if you spruced up a bit more of the combat than just having a couple extra abilities. But anyway. Global, you're going to play the crap out of the game? Ooh, as whom? Are you going to play them all or and figure out what you want as you get items, or do you have any specific ideas? Jacob, you're hype as hell for Night Rain? Yeah, I am excited about the Revenant, then the Executor, and probably the Guardian in that order. I'll probably need to try out the Raider because he could potentially be good as well, but I didn't get a good handle on the Wilder in the network test. Mendacious says go wild for Wilder. Ota says Iron Eye, Duchess, or Revenant, but you're down to fall in love with any of the others too after giving them fair shots. I hope the Iron Eye is good. I wish I was also better at using the Duchess in the network test, but I feel like the reason why I didn't get good with her is because I didn't have enough items to encourage me to play as her. Wilder has a redacted skin, so you're going to do that one, Logos? Ota said, seeing the live stream earlier, no one seemed to use the parries properly. Ooh, that's kind of scary. The Iron Eye looked super good judging the live stream. That's exciting. I've always been a big fan of the archers. You think Executor has a higher skill cap than people expect? Oh, I expect it to be really high, especially with that other form. Because knowing when to use things is half the battle, which is definitely why I felt like I needed to understand the Duchess a bit better. Because I feel like her extra ability that kind of resets a ghost of the enemy getting hit can be extremely useful, especially if you're coordinating with a couple allies. Let me double check the timeline of the Night Rain release. So, Night Rain is coming out literally tomorrow. So it's the 30th in Japan that it's being released. That makes sense. So I think tomorrow's stream is probably going to end up being a Night Rain stream, guys. Are you all prepared? I don't know if I am. I'm not sure if I want to do solo stuff or group up. Maybe I could just do things off the cuff and maybe do a solo round. And then as people trickle into the streams, maybe play with chatters. And then use the Discord voice comms. But it'll always be a little bit of a risk if I bring in rando. So I would probably be way more inclined to have regulars join if you guys wanted to. So I am going to most likely pick up the game on Steam. If you guys wanted to play with me specifically, like no pressure. Don't feel inclined to play a certain kind of way because I'm doing something. We don't need to have that kind of a parasocial relationship, but if you're looking for pals, we also have people on the Discord. We do have a Jolly Cooperation channel, although it doesn't really see much use because my community likes to focus on lore and less on like day-to-day gameplay, with a couple of exceptions like Korn. So, Korn, speaking of the devil, you're not ready? How has your Kazan been going for you? Jacob, you love Dex builds. Spirit Ashes are one of your favorite parts of Elden Ring, and Wilder looks so cool. Oto, you're curious if Executor is difficult because it doesn't have the block spam many Sekiro players are used to for pairing. I do think maybe there might be some crossovers between Kazan's pairing system or maybe Expedition 33's pairing system and the Executor. So it'll probably be really interesting to figure all that out. I don't think the target dummy in... what's it called? The fake round table was able to attack the player? Or maybe it was, because it was a puppet, wasn't it? Like one of the marionettes. So it's been a while since I played the network test to tell, and they might have added more features as well. Orange Sky, welcome back in. Bloodborne Lost Cinematics. That's kind of random, but I love it. Global, you're down to play, but you suck. Fair warning. It's fine. I'll just rage at you and spit into the mic and break it with my gain and whatnot. Corn, you've seen several reviews of solo play, and you do think you'll be fine, but it could be fun to jolly co-op. So it sounds like from some of the people talking in the spoiler channel on the Discord that the game doesn't truly seem to be super balanced for solo play, which is kind of what I was afraid of. So it might be functional, but I don't know if it's going to be a phenomenal experience. But either way, it'll be fun to kind of sandbox things in the solo mode, or at least for me specifically, like looking at things super close and taking my time without pissing off teammates if I just want to see the night roll in and get some footage of that stuff because it's cool. So anyway, looks like we are doing Night Rain tomorrow, everybody. Orange said someone with the YouTube channel called Lost Cinematics made a Bloodborne trailer. It looks good. Oh, okay. Didn't have enough context to know what you're saying. Which I said they definitely tried, but it seems more for challenge runners versus viable first-timers. So for me, I'm not a real challenge runner, but I enjoy a challenge. In other words, a masochist. Cohen said it'll be more balanced after launch, both solo and duo. Oh yeah, that is true. There has been confirmation in the last week or two that this is so stupid to me. I'm just going to say it straight, that the developers didn't think that, hey, maybe players just want to play with one friend and not two. It's like, come on, bro. How do you have a team of people that only count from 1 to 3 and they skip 2? It's like, anyway, I'm sure it would be a balancing headache, but hell, even if it was balanced around solo mode, just one extra person buff all the health of the monsters, maybe only 25% would probably be good enough for a vast majority of players. Logos, you're hoping for a duo mode? I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if they're able to add in couch co-op. That would be peak, but I doubt it. 3 is a weird number. Yes and no. I think 3 offers a good amount of variability in terms of what builds and defensive lacks can be covered by each character. So maybe one character is good for range, one is good for melee, and then you have a support. That's kind of a pretty common rock, paper, scissors pairing in games. Hey, Mike Bailey, nice to see you again. You love couch co-op so you and the wife can play together? Exactly. So, okay, folks, I think we'll end the stream a little bit early today. Very exciting stuff coming in the near future. So hopefully you all will join me on my Night Rain adventure starting tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or, just listen if you're going to be playing yourself. So anyway, I want to thank you all for joining, whether you're chatting frequently or lurking or watching the VODs. It's much appreciated, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next one. So until then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.